Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I just want to say welcome on behalf of the Seeger Center for Asian Studies. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm really, really glad to see the crowd here online today. I am Eric Schlussel, Associate Professor of History and International Affairs and Director of the Seeger Center for Asian Studies at GW. The Seeger Center is a comprehensive Asian Studies center for the university and for the DC area Asian Studies community. But one of our special foci is Taiwan and Taiwanese diasporic identities. Uh, so I'm just really delighted to have all of you and our speakers here today for yet another event this semester on sort of Taiwanese and Taiwanese American identities. I've been delighted to the depths of my heart to see the success of these events. And I'm really looking forward to today's conference. The Taiwan Education Research Project is a very, very special part of the Seeger Center's programming. And what can I say, but I'm just so happy to have this here today. I will now turn the mic over to a proper expert, Professor Leona Chen, who is Associate Professor of Chinese Language and Literature in the Department of East Asian Language and Literatures at the George Washington University, and one of the co-directors of the Taiwan Education and Research Program. So I will step out and Leona, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shaluso. My name is Leona Chen. I am the co-director of the Taiwan Education and Research Program at GWU. It is my great pleasure to welcome everybody for your participation in this afternoon's event. So the Seeger Center and Taiwan Education and Research Program, we call it TERP here. We have been longstanding hubs for Taiwan studies across humanities disciplines at GW. So TERP was established in 2004 by Professor Edward McCord to promote and support academic and policy-related study and research on Taiwan. And since then, we have expanded our programming to include a lot of different things. So in the recent years, we have supported the creation of the Taiwan Resource Center at GW Skelman Library. And we have also sponsored policy workshops on the Taiwan affairs, humanities lecture series, curriculum developments, and student fellowship programs. The Seeger Center and TERP conducted two very successful Spotlight Program events in the recent years, and this is our third year conducting Spotlight Taiwan series of events. So I'll just give you one example. In 2019, the most recent one is a film screening event. TERP and the Department of East Asian Languages and Literatures co-hosted Screening and Staging Taiwan, Multiculturalism and Identity Politics, which included both film screenings and lectures. So today's event is made possible much because of our really hardworking team. So I would like to really thank the core TERP team who really make a lot of effort and their time into making this happen. So Richard Haddock, if you can turn on or wave your hand or turn on your camera. So Richard Haddock is the Assistant Director of the Seeger Center, also the co-convener of this year's Spotlight series of events. Bobby Kincaid, who is Program Coordinator of TERP and the East Asia National Resource Center. Bobby is the one running, thank you for turning on the camera. For running the logistics here. Lisa Lackney, you saw the beautiful slides. Lisa made the slides, and she is the program associate of our East Asia National Resource Center. And of course, David Fong. David, it's your time to turn on the camera. So David is our graduate student assistant. Thank you so much. Now I would like to turn the mic over to my co-director, Alex Jubin. She will introduce and say a little bit about today's event.
Hello and everyone. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Liana. My name is Alexa Jobin, and I'm the co-director. I will now proceed to share a little bit of information about the series that supported today's event. The Seeger Center and our Taiwan Center conducted two very successful Spotlight Taiwan events. So Spotlight Taiwan is an annual series that is sponsored by Taiwanese government. In 2017, our university's Department of Theater and National Taiwan University of Arts actually co-organized the cultural exchange through dance program. And there was a final exhibition and performance with artists from Taiwan. In 2019, we co-hosted the Screening and Staging Taiwan series, Multiculturalism and Identity Politics, which included film screenings. And the Spotlight Taiwan this year focuses on the formation and transformation of Taiwanese American identities and the creative works produced by Taiwanese American artists, many of whom are with us here in the virtual room. And they will reflect on their journeys of becoming. Today's event is the final part of the Spotlight series. This virtual symposium allows us to explore Taiwanese and Taiwanese American identities through the multidisciplinary lens of the arts. It features a special keynote, which I'm going to chair, and that's followed by 3 dynamic panels. The entire event will highlight how the arts foster critical and reflexive discourses on identity formation and preservation. So welcome to the keynote event of the symposium featuring Leona Chen. She is a Taiwanese American community organizer, writer, and speaker committed to building on the legacy of Taiwanese American elder activists and serving the multi-generational Taiwanese diaspora. Of note is her 2017 poetry collection debut, Book of Chord, which confronts the shaping of Taiwanese identity through state and family narratives. And I should know she's the editor-in-chief of TaiwaneseAmerican.org. So you're all invited to visit, there's no space, TaiwaneseAmerican.org. You can also follow her work at Leona-Chen.com. Her keynote today is Tai Mei Lina, Growing Up Taiwanese American, or in Mandarin, Tai Mei, child of Tai and Mei. In her keynote address, Leona Chen will chart the formation of a distinctly Taiwanese American space. She will share especially her experience of growing up Taiwanese American, such as attending Taiwanese school, Taiwanese American church, reading Taiwanese American literature, synthesizing Taiwanese and American social issues. And she'll share her observation of Taiwanese Americans' increasing legibility throughout the last decade. Through mentors from and organizations like TaiwaneseAmerican.org, the Taiwanese American Federation of Northern California, the Taiwanese American Foundation, and others, Leona hopes to offer a narrative of abundant community care, radical storytelling, and the possibilities of intergenerational empathy. So let's give Leona a most warm welcome. I'm going to hand over to you, Leona, and you can take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. And thank you again to the Taiwan Education and Research Program for having me today. It is such an honor, and thank you all for joining me from wherever you are. So as mentioned, my name is Leona Chen. I am a Taiwanese American writer, speaker, and community organizer. I'm really passionate about serving the multi-generational Taiwanese diaspora. And I truly do believe that with thoughtful education and a really strong community, we can empower transnational solidarity, healing, and peace building. Lately, I've been telling people that my life is like a little alphabet soup of mostly T's and A's, as I've had the privilege of working with organizations like TaiwaneseAmerican.org, the Taiwanese American Federation of Northern California, the Taiwanese American Foundation Summer Conference, and many more throughout my life. All that to say, I was born and raised and work right here in Taiwanese America. Imagine just for a little bit that Taiwanese America is a physical space that we can visit together. And I want to tell you about how it was built, how it became the foundation of my upbringing, and how each of the people living here have contributed in some indelible way, and the role that each of us has now to contribute to its infrastructure and its constitution. In other words, how will all of us decide what Taiwanese America looks like and what we as Taiwanese Americans will stand for? Let's go back to 1996, the year I was born. So two things are of note. One, across the Pacific Ocean just months earlier, Taiwan held its first free and direct presidential election. And right here where we are in Taiwanese America, the people around us have had a part in that, even if they have to do so from so far away. See, the founding fathers and mothers of Taiwanese America had been here for several decades and almost 2 generations at this point. As early as the late 60s, Taiwanese immigrants came to the US as grad students, organizing among themselves as a form of survival. They organized carpools and potlucks. They formed reading groups and went on road trips together. And above everything else, they were deeply creative, thoughtful architects who not only sought to build this community, but to give it a name. The naming of these spaces as Taiwanese student associations, or later in their life cycles, Taiwanese associations, Taiwan Donghyunghui, is central to our founding narrative. The creation of Taiwanese American spaces reinforced and sustained a sovereign Taiwanese identity, even if a sovereign Taiwanese nation could not yet be recognized. It allowed overseas Taiwanese to figure out who we wanted to be, and by extension, what Taiwan could someday become. By putting their hands in the dirt, by doing the intellectual and physical work, they made meaning of spaces like this, and they gave life to our heritage. Let me give you an example. So in some neighborhoods of Taiwanese America, including mine, we didn't go to Chinese school on the weekends. Instead, I went to my local Taiwanese school where the primary language taught was Hokkien Taiwanese, and the textbooks were written by our parents and not the state of the Republic of China. Instead of a Sino-centric curriculum, they taught us a history of Taiwan that began with its indigenous nations. As a student, I learned about Taiwanese manufacturing and dreamed of someday owning a made-in-Taiwan giant bike, which I eventually did. Our choir sang Taiwanese lullabies, protest hymns, and pop songs in equal measure. I learned about the 228 massacre as a very young child and was deeply affected by the ways my elders made this history apparent and alive to me through the shadow that political persecution cast upon their lives, and the ways they sought to bring their stories to light in adulthood. As extracurricular activities, we protested Taiwan's exclusion from the United Nations and the World Health Organization. I came into my voice shouting, "Taiwan Gayu." I say now in retrospect that I maybe had a pretty radical childhood, and some might even wonder if I was indoctrinated with a specific Taiwanese ideology. But my most visceral memories of growing up in Taiwanese America is that I was deeply loved, and I was loved by people who lived out their passions and beliefs, who spoke of them endlessly, who taught me that you can care about a place even if it feels far away, and you can fight for a cause even if it feels impossible. While so many children of diaspora struggle to interpret the silence of a previous generation, I was profoundly blessed with an abundance of storytelling, of many voices desperate to find an audience, and I hope they found an eager and generous one in me. Staying close to my peers and elders and mentors has helped me see that the landmarks of Taiwanese America are not random. And if you look closely, you will find that the things you perhaps take for granted, your Taiwanese American summer camp, your Taiwanese American student group in college, the section in your parents' passport that claims Taiwan as their place of birth, the kind of work poured into making these things possible could move you to tears. And some of their architects are still with us today. we'll continue our tour of Taiwanese America to visit a Taiwanese American church, where the sermons are still delivered in Taiwanese, where the fellowship extends beyond theology to engage in the ministry of being in community, of serving or being served at a potluck, of gossiping or getting help with calculus homework from someone who is way overqualified for that. It is a sacred space, and it is equally a social space. And I know many Taiwanese Americans, even without a religious affiliation or practice, will have strong memories of singing karaoke here or enjoying a home-cooked meal. I also want to acknowledge that a Taiwanese American church like this was the site of political violence just 2 years ago in Laguna Woods. And this too was not random. But in the days that followed, I also saw Taiwanese Americans taking on the work of educating their peers and the public about the specifics of that shooting, because more so than ever, the details of the story mattered very much. And it was important to name the conflict for precisely what it was. Time and time again, paying attention to the details, speaking to the nuance, has been a part of how we as Taiwanese Americans show up even in, or especially in, the aftermath of tragedy. I think next we should visit the cultural institutions of Taiwanese America, our art galleries and restaurants and storefronts. Our movie theaters screen over a decade of work. This year, 2 Taiwanese American documentary shorts were nominated for Academy Awards, Liu Zhang's Island in Between and Sean Winnick's Nai Nai in Waipo. But there's also an entire body of work that we take great pride in. There are the original trailblazers, Justin Lin of Better Luck Tomorrow, Jessica Yu's Ping Pong Playa, Patrick Wong, Bang Bang, where the character was explicitly Taiwanese American, documentaries like Love Boat Taiwan, which many of you saw earlier this week. On Netflix, we have The Half of It, Tiger Tail, American Girl, The Brother's Son, and Hulu is about to premiere Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown. Not to mention the Taiwanese American screenwriters and producers and creatives who have contributed to so many other projects in the last few decades. There can sometimes be a cheap and long-running joke in Asian America about how nothing we do is ever good enough for our Asian mothers. But here in Taiwanese America, we reject that notion entirely. And we are so proud to recognize both their merits and the thousands of little ways they have transformed the way we see and talk about Taiwan and its diaspora. And I have a QR code here on the screen if you want to read more about Taiwanese and Taiwanese American cinema on taiwaneseamerican.org. I'll pause if you want to scan that. Taiwanese American cuisine too is being defined and redefined with not 1, but 2 cookbooks currently in circulation dedicated to this specific genre. And of course, I'm talking about Winston's A Taiwanese American Cookbook and Frankie Gau's First Generation Recipes from My Taiwanese American Home, in addition to the growing list of English language cookbooks about Taiwanese food. Our restaurants wield enormous soft power, and many actively challenge the concept of authenticity to instead focus on creating and connecting in new, interesting ways. Many of the foodies in this space recognize that Taiwanese food is deeply political because it reflects the island's layered history, cultural influences, and ongoing identity struggles. I see people like Angie and Tony pictured here from Emeryville's Good to Eat, making these stories apparent through food, how they take the time to nourish and educate at the same time. Food illustrator Felicia Leong is in this group picture as well, but I know you'd rather hear her story in her own words in just a few hours. Also pictured here are Stacy and Willie of the now closed Taiwan Bento, who during the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement provided masks to anyone who was in need so they could continue to protest safely. They were literally and spiritually feeding the hungry, providing for their neighbors and friends. In addition to making a really freaking good pork chop bento, they led our community by example to use food to connect us in ways that met the moment. Our bookstores are also my pride and joy. There is so much more to Taiwanese American literature than the few flat immigrant narratives they used to assign us in school. The landscape of Taiwanese American literature looks so different now than it did 10 years ago. And it will continue to expand and balloon and be so richly full of all of the different ways we have chosen to experience our humanity, our joy, our triumphs, our griefs, or our traumas. And sometimes they will just be fun and decadent. And I feel like that's such a sign of how far we've come and all we have to look forward to. There has never been a better time to be a Taiwanese American reader in the age of Taiwanese American literature. I invite you all to make our canon a part of your reading life. And again, I have a QR code on the bottom right of our Taiwanese American bookshop. I'll pause here quickly if you want to scan that QR code. There is also a really fun material shopping culture in Taiwanese America. For a few years now, we at TaiwaneseAmerican.org have put together a Made by Taiwanese American small business gift guide, and we're actually currently taking nominations for this year's. And as we're putting these guides together, we're often reminded that for us, it's not just about the products. The Taiwanese American influence is not just, a necklace line that has boba motifs or a candle company that has a jasmine green tea scent. The truth is, we see ourselves and our aspirations reflected and realized in these entrepreneurs. And we as Taiwanese Americans can maybe guess at the anxieties and fears and maybe parental pressures they had in making these things happen. And we are rooting for them because their courage gives us hope. And their hustle tells us something about our own future or the vastness and trajectory of our own community. Again, I'll pause here for a bit if you want to scan the QR code, but the next one is coming in just a few weeks. The reason I want us to imagine Taiwanese America as a physical space is not because I'm necessarily interested in defining its borders or qualifying any sort of citizenship, but because I want us to visualize each of us through our works and lives and ethos materially building Taiwanese America, how we will lay down the bricks, hang the paintings, and curate the museums. The symposium today deals with Taiwanese Americans in the arts, and I believe one interpretation of that is that all Taiwanese Americans are necessarily artists, are inherently creative. Isn't it true that we are always actively remaking meaning from where we come from and how we choose to belong? Isn't it true that in the absence of a coherent national narrative, we decide what it means to be Taiwanese? Isn't it true that when history textbooks collapse or dismiss our histories, we can write our own mythology? We can choose our own ancestors. What's more, if official symbols of the state, like flags, like official flowers, like if colors and monuments are so fraught in the collective political memory, then it is the work of poets and writers and artists to prescribe new images with meanings of their own. A national flower is not always a reminder of beauty. A statue is not always of someone to admire. A flag is not always something to salute. So where do we as Taiwanese Americans find beauty, love, and dignity? Who determines these things about Taiwan? I believe the authority belongs to the Taiwanese people, and I see the diaspora engaging in this kind of work all the time with increasing urgency and scale. We as Taiwanese Americans are becoming legible in the national and global narrative because we have done the work for generations now, because we wear our stories outside of our bodies. I see it in fiction, especially as a reader growing up alongside the canon of Taiwanese American literature. In increasing numbers and with a stunning level of tenderness, there are so many writers who are not just writing Taiwanese American characters as descriptions, but they're doing this earnest and difficult work of excavating from their own lives and from the stories of those in our community to put on paper a Taiwanese American context. In recent years, we have worked beyond the appearance of representation to its purpose. We are coming into an understanding of ourselves and our histories. We see them reflected in the longings and limitations of the people that we love. We have become real to each other, and we have become real to others. I see this also in the way we talk about Taiwanese food. in the creative problem solving we do to define it, or else subvert the exhausting expectation to even define it at all. In my lifetime, Taiwanese American has become an accepted identity, an academic concern, and even an aesthetic. For me, it is a personal framework for principled activism, a way to be loudly grateful for those who have made both elements of my identity possible, and to protect it from my descendants. My question to you and to myself nearly every day is, what will we do with this kind of visibility? If we accrue power and influence and capital, what will be their result? How will we together write the Constitution of Taiwanese America? How will we become good ancestors? My own answer to this has varied, as I too am still growing up and discovering myself after a lifetime of eagerly embodying the hopes and politics of my elders. I admit I'm learning to be more generous, to be the welcoming concierge and not the gatekeeper of our community. I have learned that with a history as troubled and violent as ours, the best way to build peace is to work for justice and not vengeance. I'll share in a very vulnerable anecdote. A year after I stepped into the role as editor-in-chief of TaiwaneseAmerican.org, I received a pitch from a grandson of a KMT or Kuomintang veteran. He offered, with so much pride, a portrait of a grandfather that was able to rise through the ranks, the achievements he accrued, and how his success has now cascaded through generations. I was 22 years old when I read that piece and had come from a lineage of people seeking justice against the KMT, with many even calling for its abolition. I had no interest then in sharing my platform with someone so proud to have benefited from the KMT's colonial regime. At the time, I felt the story lacked awareness and was asking for sympathy from the wrong kind of girl. It's been 6 years since I received and declined that pitch, and I think of that moment with sincere regret. I wish I'd been more curious and more sensitive to the reality that none of us choose what family we're born into, but all of us long to be proud of them. What's more, it wasn't my platform to begin with, it was ours. And I did us as Taiwanese Americans a disservice by dismissing some histories instead of inviting them to learn and heal with us as a community. I wonder what would happen if we practiced more curiosity, if we intentionally chose discourse over division. I don't know the answer to that quite yet, but I know that we do not progress as a community when we pretend to be apolitical, when we sidestep nuance instead of leaning into it deeply and thoughtfully. There are more of us now than ever who will say we are proud to be Taiwanese American. I recognize all of the powerful little acts sustained over generations for us to be able to declare this boldly, loudly, and publicly. But if that is our inheritance, what will be our legacy? What will it mean to be proud? Will we be principled? Will we be generous? Will we build a pedestal for ourselves or a bridge towards others? I think everyone is here because we are trying to figure out why Taiwanese American identity matters at all and what the future holds for us and this space. Why does it matter is such a surreal question because anybody else would answer, it matters because it is a part of me. And that would be a complete statement with no footnotes. But identity matters for Taiwanese Americans for the same reasons it matters to anyone from anywhere. We just have something different at stake. There is the fact of Taiwanese American identity, which despite its political tensions, is simply a representation of where you are from and where you are. This is the logic that drives the movement to write in Taiwanese on the US Census every 10 years. It is what you are. It is not inherently a political statement, though it does carry the gravity of a politicized action. We often talk about Taiwanese identity facing a violent erasure, institutionally, diplomatically, in ways big and small. Taiwanese identity is daily conflated with Chinese identity, either by people who collapse the differences out of convenience, or more powerfully, as part of the PRC's willful erasure of Taiwanese sovereignty, identity, and self-determination. But for most people, that is a systemic reason and not always a personal one. And I think that last one, the personal reason, is what gets us to care and to carry on the work. And so there is the implication of Taiwanese American identity. How do you as an individual fill it with meaning? I challenge each of us to take some time to reflect on why it matters to us as individuals, because I think that level of detail and that range of answers is what will keep us engaged in a thoughtful, heritage-based community that you won't dissolve into, a feral pack of soldiers on a hollow Taiwanese nationalist identity. We do not choose what families or histories we are born into. And yet, Taiwanese identity has historically been chosen and not assumed. How do we make sense of that? And how do we move forward with that in mind? The politicization of Taiwanese identity makes it something we have to declare and defend over and over again. We emphasize that we're Taiwanese because we're not allowed to say it at the Olympics. We emphasize that we're Taiwanese because we are aligned to a very young democracy that is threatened daily. The children of Taiwanese immigrants like me, who have memories of being told at a very young age in very clear terms that we are Taiwanese and not Chinese, inherit a very specific logic. We learn that there is an ideology that would deny us this identity, that would deny this nation its sovereignty, that would try to tell us that we are something else. Therefore, you learn a lot about a person who says they're Taiwanese, like how resilient they are, how much they care, how willing they are to lean into its history and its complexities. We as Taiwanese Americans have the opportunity to workshop all of that and figure out a framework for forming identity that reflects how Taiwan has evolved, that acknowledges that we are in a different Taiwan that our parents lived through decades ago. We can do our part to participate in the more healing and restorative and redemptive work for a country and nation still grappling with political trauma. In fact, as we head into the elections here, 2 countries grappling with political and everyday violence. First-generation Taiwanese Americans have taught me so much about how their love and sense of justice has propelled them to do remarkable things. And I think the best way I can honor that legacy is to support work that moves Taiwanese identity forward. And to do that, it has to be more generous. It has to account for changes in circumstances and conditions and ideologies. These are the questions I have committed so much of my life to, and I'm grateful to wrestle with them with you, shoulder to shoulder, right here in Taiwanese America. That concludes the remarks I prepared for today, and thank you again so much for having me. I look forward to continued conversation with the moderators and with you all. I will share my screen again with links to my website, which includes my writing and my email. So if anything I share today resonates with you, or if you have a hot take you'd like to share, please do reach out. I really care about being here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leona, for your wonderful talk, truly capacious, and it comes from your heart. It touches me as a Taiwanese who grew up in Taiwan. I especially appreciate your transparency in sharing the experience you had and the lesson that you learned in dismissing, right, someone with KMT Kuomintang background, and how could they possibly be quote unquote, authentically Taiwanese. I must say I've had very similar experiences, and I admire you for your capacity to be able to reflect on that, even sharing that publicly. It's very valuable for all of us in capacity building, community building. You spoke powerfully to the community bonding effect of cinema, Taiwanese American cinema. Here in our center, we just hosted this week a wonderful screening and talk back regarding the documentary Love Boat of Taiwan, right? It's the story of generations of Taiwanese Americans. And you concluded by calling upon us to choose discourses over division. I was taking note and I thought that's so beautifully framed and articulated. and to practice curiosity. I believe that those are your words as well. At the end of the day, I believe living under and between the shadows of China and America, Taiwanese American communities and identities have been confronting this effect of double marginalization, neither here nor there. And of course, there's the experience of those of us who would then go to Taiwan and experience reverse culture shock were not fully accepted there. So that's another type of marginalization, since Taiwanese Americans, depending on whom you talk to within Taiwan, they may regard this community with some suspicion, or perhaps that, why are you meddling in our come election time, meddling in our local business, and so on. So it's extremely complex. You speak of a minority community inside the US, you speak of this community's precarious position, I guess, as diasporic subjects in Taiwan. It's a question that crosses the Pacific. So I have the privilege of being able to ask you the first question. We have many questions and comments, no doubt, coming in. I would like to invite everyone to please type in your questions in the chat if you have questions for our keynote speaker, Leona. So my question is, what advice do you have? We are here in Washington, D.C. trying to build Taiwanese American communities. And we did take your advice to heart. We are kind of doing, every year we always have some kind of film event, right? So then this year we had another event beyond boba tea. So we resonate very well with your slide. We had these food commentators and chefs talking about what exactly is Taiwanese food. It's so hybrid a location, right? And the cuisine is hybrid. So how do we define Taiwanese identity? Do you have particular advice for us as a university here, trying to tread lightly? At one point you talk about politics, but Washington, D.C. is a very political place. Unfortunately, there's no way to claim that any event's apolitical. When we host events, we always have to think about potential reaction, not just from Chinese students, but also from China, but also the university itself, who is taking whenever they hear of Taiwan, there's some sensitivity. So these are lines we're trying to tread when promoting, when organizing events, even when thinking of what, even ideas. What have been your experience, and what advice do you have for community building?
Oh, I love that question. And I think it speaks to how do we create a safe space to have hard conversations? And I hope the biggest takeaway from sort of my remarks is that I grew up in a place where people made me feel loved, and that empowered me to change my mind. And even now, as I have politics that maybe diverge from my elders, I still feel loved by them. And I think that's something that is important as we build out these spaces. And that's not always like radical or interesting work. It's sometimes slow and silly. And people who make sure that you get home after an event safely are the same people that you will go to when you are wrestling with something intellectually. So I think the soft work of building trust, of building camaraderie should not be taken for granted, and is probably the most fundamental part of being able to have conversations like this. And I think the discourse is important, because I don't think I would have ever broken out of my myopia if I hadn't been in conversation with someone whose history was only on paper diametrically opposed to mine. As an example, I've always been kind of mean and petty about Taiwanese people who identify as Chinese because I wasn't curious about why that was. And I had a conversation with someone recently who comes from a Weissingeron family. And she said, have you ever considered that we didn't think we were allowed to? And it wasn't a form of erasure or oppression. It was self-consciousness that we come from families who have done horrible things to Taiwanese people. And therefore, we didn't feel like we deserved to. And that took all of the edge out of my anger and gave me a whole new perspective on what Taiwanese American look like when we have conversations like that. I think we have to create a culture of grace where you can choose politics that change and differ from your parents or your surroundings. And I hope I'm an example of like changing your mind as you encounter new ways of thinking and new communities. And I think that culture cannot take root when division is invoked as sort of an impenetrable coping mechanism for what happened in the past. At the same time, though, like neutrality is not a fertile ground for this kind of discourse either. So if you are an organization that thinks that it's too sensitive to touch, I don't know if that's productive either.
Most excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think that gives a lot of food for thought. We are now officially starting our Q&A here. And Richard, please unmute yourself. There's a question coming.
Greetings. Thank you so much, Leona, for again such beautiful opening remarks to really set the tone of this symposium and the important work that we're trying to engage in here at GW. So my question is, so I'm Puerto Rican myself, and I actually came into conversation a lot with how I want to relate to my heritage and struggle through actually my engagement in Taiwan affairs. And here at GW, Eric Schlissel leads a fantastic and vibrant Uyghur Studies initiative. And we've hosted several events before that put into conversation different advocacy groups or social movement groups that represent different nations and communities that have to struggle with different institutionalization or other forms of aggression, identity, erasure. I myself, I'm hoping to do more work that deliberately connects Taiwan and Puerto Rico in conversation with each other for many parallels I've sensed between the two. So with that as kind of my foreground of my thinking, I wanted to ask your personal experience as well as maybe professional experience when it comes to building allyships with other communities, with other communities of interest, individuals of interest that may have parallel or similar struggles, experiences that we can elevate and celebrate each other. I do find that at GW, we can try to use this platform to, again, bring more communities in conversation with each other that might not have been able to have a conversation space together. So just with that in mind, I'd love to hear your reflections on that.
Oh, I also love this question. Let me try to answer like the ideological connections and then the interpersonal connections. One is, I think, to find people like you and me and our peers who are doing the same kind of work, because I think that support helps us sustain the energy and heart to move forward. I'll give an example where in the Taiwanese American community, our generations think very differently about what it means to build a meaningful community. And I really struggle with it. I feel very isolated in the difficulty of that. But then reaching out to my peers in the Hong Konger community who have the same kind of experiences, being able to vent to each other has been a very valuable source of comfort and energy for me. So I think being able to talk about the things that we share, the things that are hard beyond the things that are worthwhile, keeps us engaged in the work. And then ideologically, I think being able to share our histories and the ways that we are talked about relative to how we would like to talk about ourselves has also been really impactful. And so we do a lot of reading groups where we will pick the curriculum for, Taiwan, and the Hong Kongers or the Palestinians will choose their reading curriculum, and we'll put them in conversation with each other and try to figure out what are some ways that we can inform each other, what are some ways that we can share without necessarily wanting like exactly parallel tracks. A group I was with recently hosted a series of conversations, and I gave remarks about the parallels between Palestinians and Pingpu activists in Taiwan. And I think it's just about what is the shared hope? What are the tactics that have organized against us, and how do we want to respond together? I'm really looking forward to how you think about Puerto Rican and Taiwanese solidarity. So I hope we stay in touch, and I'm excited to learn more. I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely, and will do. Thanks so much, Leona.
Of course.
So we have a question from Shuan Cai at UT Austin. The question is, could you share any insight on how Taiwanese Americans have integrated into US society? and they're curious about any personal experience as well. As for the audience member, Shuan Cai is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Government at UT Austin. And their research focuses on political participation among Asian Americans, especially Taiwanese Americans. So yeah, Leona, so Taiwanese American integration into US society.
Sure. So in terms of political integration with US society, there are more and more Taiwanese Americans running for office in different layers of political participation. There's also a lobbying organization among Taiwanese Americans known as HWAPA, the Formosan Association for Public Affairs, that engages within the infrastructures of US politics to be able to advocate for Taiwan. I see a lot of different ways that the different generations have thought about the role that they want to play in the US. Like I think there's an earlier, more conservative generation that founded things like FAPA that are interested in bolstering US-Taiwan allyship, and that's why they want to participate. There's also an ongoing lineage of people who maybe question US imperialism and want to be more critical of what that connection looks like. There's also organizations like the Taiwanese American Citizens League that focus on civic engagement among Taiwanese Americans that are not necessarily tethered to Taiwanese politics, but just take on this community that they've established and use that as a way to better connect and encourage Taiwanese Americans to participate in the civic lives and communities around them. And they're the ones who do things like this campaign to write in Taiwanese on the US Census and also get out the vote. So lots of ways to integrate, lots of ways that those are perhaps in opposition to each other. I think that's what makes Taiwanese Americans so interesting. There's not a single approach for what healthy US-Taiwan relations should look like or what healthy Taiwanese American citizenship looks like either.
Thank you. This is perfect. Since our focus is on the arts and storytelling, so obviously I have a follow-up question about that. In looking at the Taiwanese American films and looking at Taiwanese American art, all these stories over the years, whether within or beyond your TaiwaneseAmerican.org, surely there are many stories, many kind of stories being told about Taiwanese American identity. So what's missing? What do you think? Is there some kind of story or type of stories that are not being told often, but should be told?
Yeah. I would say it's not a question of like missing. I think it's just still being written. TaiwaneseAmerican.org hosts this creative writing prize with author Charles Yu, and we're a couple years deep into it now. And there's so much work being done that wrestles with questions of Taiwanese American heritage and identity in ways that are not perhaps mainstream yet, but are being considered thoughtfully, especially by young writers. Like it's astounding the ways they think about these issues at such a young age. And so I think the response I would give to like what stories are missing is like, what can I do to better bring these to light? If there's something that you are thinking about, you're not sure, like, oh, I don't know if people can relate, write the story and we'll find a way to share it. And I think that's what will make Taiwanese American identity and culturally informed writing and art more meaningful, is that it won't represent just one narrative, it'll represent many. And again, I think that's what prevents us from collapsing into sort of like a unified Taiwanese nationalism, which is not the point. We want to create space for complexities and nuance, and that begins with having more and more voices represented.
Excellent. I really appreciate how you're pushing for intra-group internal diversity, as well as speaking of Taiwanese American community as a diversity issue to more dominant communities. I think this is very much needed in today's world, and I think the nuance you're bringing to this is just admirable. We continue to welcome questions and comments in the chat, and as I mentioned, I will read it out loud. Eric, please unmute yourself. I just saw your.
Sorry, I had a bunch of, first of all, thank you so much for
Yes.
this wonderful, very thoughtful, very grounded talk, and for all the optimism that comes with it. I've been listening very closely with, as Richard said, the Uyghur diaspora community in mind, and I had a number of questions about dealing with the same kind of generational divide. essentially because in the Uyghur diaspora community, you have youth who've done an amazing job of opening spaces for nuance and complexity and the expression of living identities through the arts, and an older generation that's still very much locked into that policy activism, have to get American empire on board with us mode. And I was sort of curious about your strategies for bridging that divide, but I think you've spoken to that very, very effectively. So I just want to say thank you very much. And this has given me a lot to think about.
Thank you. And it helps to know that we are not alone in this. And I think what keeps us and sustains us is that at the end of the day, they are people that we love, even if we disagree about the approaches, and we care because they taught us how to care. Being in community and choosing not to consider my elders as disposable has really grounded a lot of the way I think about this kind of work. And I'm not always optimistic, but I do always care. And so I'm so grateful to have this space to sort of figure out how can we move forward and how can we embody a movement that does not leave anyone behind, even if we have diverged in some of our tactics and approaches.
Thank you, Eric. I think there are a lot of parallels between Uyghur diaspora and the Taiwanese diaspora, which made me think of the ecology in Washington, D.C., right? And it's a policy town. So when people think or talk about Taiwan here, it's very often through international affairs, policy angle, international relations. And of course, I think a lot of Taiwanese Americans, myself included, we are not happy about that. This is twice when Taiwan's brought up, it's always in the frame of US-China relation. Of course, that's probably unavoidable kind of geopolitics, but you are doing something that's very productive. You're talking about art, so kind of moving us away from that. But how do you feel about this kind of this tug of war in the larger context, US-China, as if internationally Taiwan can only be understood, it only makes sense within US-China relations? And how do we move away from that? How do we, even when talking about art, very often we get that kind of questions. And I'm someone who does film studies, by the way. So, yeah.
I don't know if we can get away from that framing how people buy into our work, but I also think that we as Taiwanese and Taiwanese Americans can choose to respond to whatever resonates with us in the moment. And most of the times it's not US-China politics. Like if you want to be really calculating, you can ride that momentum and that interest to get more visibility for your work. And maybe that's what will get people to pay attention. But what you have to offer is so much more interesting and complex than that. I really grieve that so much of the oxygen in the room is often sucked up by like war and aggression and like policy and things like that. But I also don't see that as like a fertile space for creativity. And so staying close to what is a fertile space. And I think it's the intellectual questions, it's the soft questions, it's the cultural fabric that is at stake. And I'll say it's very regional. I'm sure a lot of the questions in DC are about policy. I'm in the Bay Area. We do a lot of like tech diplomacy, a lot of semiconductor talk. And I think we can try to recognize all the ways that these connections are, as an ecosystem, helpful, right? Like there is a space for military conversations, a space for tech and supply chain conversations. And we as artists, we have our own lane and we can work together in the building of that Taiwanese America, knowing that, there's a larger vision and we can make it work.
I agree. I think indeed, coming from Bay Area, you're familiar with the parallel issues, right? The semiconductor talk, the focus of Taiwan only matters because of TSMC. It's parallel to what we face here in Washington, D.C. It's a version of that. But there are so many like you out there doing excellent work. I'm thinking of K. Ming Zhang, who's a Taiwanese American poet, right? And then part of the Kundi Man. And how she reimagines realism, I believe, among many other things, and drawing on mythology, kind of mythological elements. I think this is a very fruitful move. The more diverse arts we can have, the better. And Jonathan, she actually one of our moderators. Would you like to ask the question yourself? Yeah. Hey, Jonathan.
Sure, Leona, this was such a wonderful talk, and again, I really am vibing with your optimism about storytelling and abundance. I think that is something we really have to keep in mind. My question is also in the chat. I'd just love to hear more, since we're on this topic, about your identity as a poet. What do you feel poetry can do as storytelling on some of these fronts that you mentioned?
Thank you for your question. And also, I think I know your uncle, Dr. Hong, in the Bay Area. Anyways, as a poet, I think something I struggled a lot with was feeling like my work was worthless, because it sometimes does feel like just poetry. And writing has sometimes felt like a meaningless intellectual exercise when, there are people dying and there's real state violence, and the policies that could ensure stability and safety in Taiwan are going to be written in DC and not by poets. And I was also writing Taiwanese American poetry. So when I was writing, I was like, I feel like the target audience for this is like 4 people, and I'm probably related to all of them. And on top of that, it was written in a language that, English, that has sometimes felt hostile to the people that I loved. But as I was writing it and as the people I loved were reading it, I realized that the thing that I wanted most was also the thing that ultimately happened. I wanted to be xiaosun. I wanted to be a good daughter and prove that the things that were given to me by my elders were taken to heart. And in return, people like my mom, like your uncle, felt like they were heard. And again, it just comes down to like, I knew my lane. I knew the work I had ahead in sort of the bigger community. And I was so lucky to have mentors who kept me close to that work, like Ho Chi Tai, who I think it might be in the audience right now. Like, he has a mission statement to build community by empowering individuals. And I was one such individual who was always I was never shamed for caring in the ways that I cared. And that carried me through so much in my life. And even if the tactics I used diverged from what people wanted of me, it was always so helpful that they knew I cared and they wanted me to keep caring in all the ways that I could.
This is wonderful. I believe time is coming up. We have Delphine, thank you, who says that they enjoyed the Book of Court. And we actually have a quick question from Tim Chang here in the chat, which resonates with my own. I translated a Taiwanese playwright play written in Taiwanese into English, and he's someone who insists on actually writing Taiwanese as well, speaking only Taiwanese. It's based in Tainan. And so this brings us to Tim's question: how are the arts, history, and culture in Taiwan? How can that be connected to Taiwanese American arts, history, and culture, or vice versa?
I think one of the ways I've observed that they may be a little bit different, and I've heard this feedback from like lit professors, is that Taiwanese Americans are a little bit more like self-obsessed, and that may be a Western influence, and that we are very concerned with the self, which is not a bad thing. It just is a different thing. Versus, I think Taiwanese literature tends to be a little bit more communal. Something that I've really enjoyed is reading more translated Taiwanese literature lately and being able to compare that with Taiwanese American literature, and just sort of seeing the ways that the subject is prioritized and biased differently. In terms of what connects us, it's like this longing to make sense of something that is incoherent, and the lack of a national narrative that is, cohesive and clean. What do you do? And I think the people of Taiwan are figuring that out, and we are as well. And that's really exciting to be in exchange towards. So thank you for that question. And
Brilliant.
Also, you have Taiwanese lit recs, because I've been reading a lot of them.
Yes, you speak of kind of, it's like an orchestra, different notes, but they resonate and doesn't have to be the same. I think it's beautiful. So wonderful. Thank you, everyone. We're exactly on the dot. We are going to conclude this session, take a little break, but do come back for the next session moderated by Richard. So let's give Leona a hand. Thank you so much for
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
opening.
Please stay in touch, and I'll see you guys in a few hours as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And now we'll take a break. Yeah.
All right, everyone. We're about to get started once more in just a minute or two. So if I can actually have Eric and Kaylee start to uh, appear on the screen, we can have a quick chat.
Hey, Richard. Can you hear me?
Yes. I don't see you yet, though, but I do
Oh,
hear you.
am I like second, third page, maybe? I don't know.
Well, I'm here. I made it.
Yep, great. See and hear you. Thank you, Kaylee.
Perfect.
How do I step up? How did you step up?
I
Oh,
pressed the. You just start talking
you're
and do the video.
I'm talking. Is it not picking me up?
Did you
oh,
turn
it
on the
is.
video? Okay, I hear you. You have a
Yeah,
beautiful
exactly.
voice,
Yeah.
Eric.
Yeah, so we hear you, but I don't see your video.
Hold on. This Can you see me? I see me on me. I don't know if that makes sense.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, I don't see you, but I can draw a picture of you and hold it beside me, and then we can pretend like it's you. We're in the same room.
Hold on. Let me just. I'm wondering my company blocks Zoom. Hold on. Let me. Let me
Oh, there's a chance, actually. I wouldn't be surprised if. Are you using a Taiwan Plus laptop?
Yep. I'm gonna just come
Oh,
back in. I'll be right back.
okay.
Sounds good. But yep, Kaylee, nothing wrong here. So I can hear and see you
Cool.
very clearly. So good to
Perfect.
have you there.
Great to meet you, Richard.
Kaylee, just from when I looked at the description that of all our speakers, and I just noticed all the projects that you've been on. I mean, just from a pop culture junkie perspective too. I mean, Discovery Channel, Nat Geo, Marvel, Walking
And
Dead. I mean,
yeah, I think what's
I'm trying to listen to
yeah,
your stories a long time.
yeah. I think it's going to be pretty cool. 'Cause I think the reality is that being in Taiwan really gives you a lot of opportunities. I think that's
Mhm.
what
Can you hear me
boils
now?
down to.
See me
There
now?
you are.
Eric, yes, we can
I
see you.
see you.
Saves Kayla the trouble of
Excellent.
drawing my face.
I already
Well,
finished it though. I'll share it with you later.
All right.
Yeah, but it's all
great. So so with the time, and now we can see all our panelists here. I'm just going to go ahead and get the panel discussion going. So, hello everybody, welcome back to the virtual symposium, Taiwanese Americans, Voices Through the Arts, a Taiwan Humanities virtual symposium. My name is Richard Haddock. I'm the Assistant Director for the Seeger Center for Asian Studies here at the George Washington University, where we do public outreach, scholarly research, and education development on Asian studies writ large, but with a special attention to Taiwan. We do many public outreach programs, and including in conjunction with our Taiwan Education and Research Program, as well as the many co-sponsors for today's virtual symposium. So knowing about our time, we have just under an hour for this next panel here. So I'm going to go kind of dive right into the subject. So this panel, we are focusing on the importance of film, documentary film, as a powerful medium into negotiating, navigating, and expressing, as well as celebrating Taiwanese American and diasporic identities. With me, I'm joined by two excellent panelists. We have Eric Tsai, who is a producer and digital content lead at Taiwan Plus. He started working at Taiwan Plus when it launched in 2021 and has been contributing to various Taiwan education efforts for over a decade. While at Taiwan Plus, Eric has helped launch Taiwan Explained, a YouTube channel, and Taiwan Plus News Instagram, which, by the way, I'm a ardent follower. I get all the updates and like as many of the posts I can see. Eric grew up in Taipei and went to undergrad in New Jersey. Prior to returning to Taiwan, he was a tech product manager in New York and Boston. Also joining our conversation is Kaylee Emerson, who started his career as a photographer and soon transitioned into video production, where he found a love for documentary filmmaking. As a documentary filmmaker, he has worked with Discovery Channel, Nat Geo, Kia Motors, Vox, Vice Media, and Taiwan Plus. In the commercial space, he has shot and directed campaigns for Kia, for Netflix, for The Walking Dead, Red Bull, ASUS, EVA Air, Taiwan Tourism, Hawaii Tourism, and even Marvel. Additionally, over the years, he has directed dozens of music videos for artists, with the majority generating millions of views. Just a quick note for those who might not be aware of Taiwan Plus, it's really blossomed into a multimedia platform and creative outlet for, in my view, participating in that conversation between what's happening in Taiwan and how Taiwan is interacting with the world. And so there's just so many great multimedia content that can be really informative to a wide variety of audiences. I mean, there was also documentaries about the indie rock music scene in Taiwan, which I'm also very supportive of as an avid music lover myself, and also produces a lot of important documentaries highlighting contemporary aspects of Taiwan society. There's one documentary that Taiwan Plus produced on an ongoing theatrical performance titled "This Is Not an Embassy," and the documentary film Ambiguous Borders is telling the story of this very important documentary theater piece, which explores Taiwanese national identity and nationhood and challenges constructs of sovereignty through the critical lens of theater and performance. So Taiwan Plus is doing really excellent multimedia journalism and documentation. So if you haven't already, please check out Taiwan Plus for their many very interesting and invigorating output. So just one quick note on logistics. As we did with the previous, with the keynote address, we will toss the mic over to our speakers for presentations. And then after that, I'll moderate a Q&A session with the audience. Throughout the conversation, feel free to drop in questions in the chat. I'll be happy to read them aloud. And we can have our conversation until around 3 p.m. DC time, in which case we'll start to transition to the next panel afterward. So Eric, I'd like to turn the virtual floor over to you. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I think everything kind of worked out, aligned well. I used to be, as mentioned before, I used to be in the States, but I'm currently, I've moved back to Taiwan, and just so happens I'm on a trip to US right now. I'm currently in Boston. I'm assuming poor Kaylee is actually up in the middle of the night to join this. I've prepared a little bit of a presentation, but it's not a whole lot. Can this be seen properly? Okay, cool. All right, so I guess a little bit background as to even myself. So after going to the States for college, graduating, I worked as a product manager. For those who don't know what a product manager is, ultimately I am the go-between between the business and the engineering side of people. So I want X, Y, and Z into something that the engineers can actually work with. And also, usually we joke around that whenever the client or the user wants X, Y, and Z, they really want A, B, and C. So it's a lot of this. The reason why I bring this up is also because this is kind of where I hone my skills in kind of breaking down more complicated questions, more complicated issues, and also communication and negotiation between different stakeholders, and to understand what the real problem is and how we want to achieve that. On the side of it, while I was at work, outside of work, I was started off doing more activism stuff. This is me and my friend Jenny Wang. Some of you may or may not know her, who we used to hold rallies in the middle of Times Square. Every year there would be a push for Taiwan to join the United Nations and for couple of years, Jenny and I both helped direct this rally as well too. But at the same time, we realized that there was a lack of younger people at the rallies. Either they were, there's some, but they probably came with their families. But we realized that a lot of the younger Taiwanese Americans who kind of were born and raised in the United States don't always come out to these kind of events. And we were wondering why. And I think a large part of the reason that we came to was that there was not as strong of an understanding about Taiwan's culture and history. This largely attributes to Taiwan's, white terror era, when people were being prosecuted for just calling themselves Taiwanese. So this led to not just one generation of people being lost, but rather any descendants as well too, because talking about Taiwanese became more of a taboo topic. So two of us wanted to focus on giving talks to teach people more about Taiwan's history and culture. So we did just that. We started kind of a small, I hesitate to call it organization because it sounds way bigger than it actually is. But we would, small group of people who would go to different talks. We work with undergraduate organizations, undergraduate Taiwanese American organizations to speak about certain topics. We usually work with them to see what topic they'd want. More times than not, the first topic they want to talk about is U.S.-Taiwan-China relations. But sometimes we do get more specific questions. I remember one time at Brown University, talking to Brown University, they said, hey, we talked about US, Taiwan, China, but can we talk about the history of same-sex marriage, the social movements that's happened within Taiwan to achieve same-sex marriage? And at first, I was personally a little bit reticent to do it just because it was a very different topic than I've done before. But also, I wasn't part of the queer community, the LGBTQ community myself. And so it was a little bit hard for me to tackle a problem that might not be able to represent who the people properly. But thankfully, working with talking to a lot of other experts, reached out to many resources within Taiwanese American community, and was able to deliver it. And it was one of the best talks that I had. If anyone knows Liu Wen or Wen Liu, had her on call on the side and do a Q&A at the very end just to make sure that all the topics were correct and information was right. Then I moved back to Taiwan and I joined Taiwan Plus. As mentioned, it was launched in 2021, and it was to say that it launched with a clear direction would be true and false. We knew where we were going, but at the same time, we didn't really know exactly what was going on. In the sense of like, there needed to be something like Taiwan Plus, but it took a while for us to figure out what that form would take. And so this was the first piece that the first piece of content, I guess, or video that I've ever done for Taiwan. And I'll play a little bit of it. I won't go through the whole thing.
Thailand? I said, no, Taiwan. And then it was like, what is Taiwan?
他们还是会说台湾是泰人吗？还是会问这种很基本的。
People knew about Made in Taiwan. They'd heard of that before.
可能就是 part of China 或者是 Thailand.
How little people know about Taiwan, the situation, and when I try to explain what Taiwan is,
I would tell them geographically where we're located.
Tell them about like how where we are and like which part of Asia it is.
Try to explain the complicated geopolitical situation of why.
有些人知道台湾，他就会问我说，那 what's the relations between you guys and China?
I have to choose Taiwan or Chinese Taipei.
Taiwan, 台风金马.
There's a lot that I don't know.
Taiwan is China, also isn't China.
就要 explain so much about cross-strait relations 跟就是中国的关系。
I have to do a lot of explanations about history.
No matter how I explain, they didn't understand. And then they often still look really confused.
It's hard actually.
I find it really hard.
You can't really just explain Taiwan in one sentence.
How do you explain that? You can't.
If you had to. So when Taiwan Plus essentially launched, the biggest idea was to be part of the conversation. And there was a lot of controversies when Taiwan Plus was launched. It was oftentimes said as a mouthpiece for the government, or more specifically, a mouthpiece for the Democratic Progressive Party. But all the measures were taken to be independently operating. And a big part of it was really just to be part of the conversation. And this really came into light when Nancy Pelosi came to visit Taiwan, and we were able to report on this thing. Remember, this was maybe like a couple of months into Taiwan Plus's launch, so it was relatively early on, and we were able to talk about Nancy Pelosi coming down, and international media was reporting about this because more times than not, we see international media talking about Taiwan, and more times than not, it is usually two white dudes talking about Taiwan, people who maybe are experts on Taiwan but haven't really been on the ground and doesn't really represent the all sides of Taiwan that the Taiwanese people can really understand it to be. So when Nancy Pelosi came, our news director was invited to a couple of broadcast news to be part of that conversation. And this is kind of really early on, we realized the importance of Taiwan Plus as being part of the conversation, being part of what is going on, not just within Taiwan, but also within Asia and even part around the world. So this is kind of our newsroom. We before we talk about like the digital content side, we have most of our team does work on the broadcast news. We have multiple broadcast times. We have a total of about 2 hours of live news every single day, Monday through Sunday, and so it's a really big effort just to get that information up there. We pour things on international, regionally in Asia, and also within Taiwan as well too. This is a typical kind of rundown. This is a rundown from if anyone's worked in broadcast news, this is what goes on behind the scenes. And we have things like, this is from last year, like an APEC summit. We would have something around like, say Gaza hospital crisis, or even like, the pop culture, concert going culture. This was one of our reporters going to talk about how a group of Taiwanese Taylor Swift fans went to book out an entire movie theater just to have like a virtual concert almost. And so this thing really came into play as we're talking about digital content. Things like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, we kind of put everything up there. It's a newscast, so we have multiple stories that we just put individual stories up there. But it wasn't really until, so I started off in the social media team, and then later on I transferred into the news team. And it wasn't until a little bit later that we were able to start Instagram, for example. And with something like Instagram, because the content is so much more different, we don't, on YouTube, on Facebook, we're talking about horizontal videos, but on Instagram, we're going with a lot more vertical videos. That means a lot more curation to do with it. We're doing a lot more photo stories. And so a large part of it, we started doing a lot more curation. We don't push out as much content on our Instagram as we do on other platforms, but it's very curated to just Taiwan and Asia in general. You can see like this is a screenshot, I think, from last night. So we have some typhoon stuff, some votes, and there's just some local issues as well too. The Pride March was last week, I believe, and then the Trans March was the day before that. So we have a range of topics, but a lot more specific on our Instagram. And that's kind of what the digital team that was really created only about a year ago to really focus on the digital content to really focus on as well too. And when thinking about how to pick out the stories, when I first started, it was a large part of it thinking about who our target audiences are, and not just the target, but like really, I pushed for something that was called personas. We used it in product management, and ultimately, it's creating this person that you can visualize, that you can see, and then their needs and frustrations are real. Such as, when I thought of it out, there was, there's a lot of Taiwanese people who go overseas to the United States, for example, that really has a connection to Taiwan, loves Taiwan, but has a hard time talking about Taiwan too. So we wanted to be the source in which these people can use Taiwan Plus as a way to help share their content, to help share more information about their homeland. We also had, if anyone recognizes, we stole a photo of Hudson Yang just because, to me, he's, I don't know, the most Taiwanese American person I can see. This is not actually his profile, so they'll take that with a grain of salt. So this is a Taiwanese American person who was born and raised in Taiwan, born and raised in America, has connections to Taiwan, but it's really hard to learn and talk about Taiwan just because things are either in Mandarin or sometimes things are, as Leona has said, sometimes talking about Taiwan, though not political, to other people, it seems like a political statement. And lastly is just, a generic person within America, probably in a major city, that is interested in things that Taiwan is good at. Whether this is, I kind of had in my mind this person, Eugene, who is, looking to focus on sustainability and government systems. And so this is the idea that we want to create, this kind of resonance to show people that Taiwan is a part of the conversation. This person might not be interested in Taiwan, but they're interested in something that Taiwan does well. So using things like that, I essentially, as Richard said before, I started Taiwan Explained, started off as Taiwan Plus One, but some rebranding. Ultimately is a more YouTube focused a YouTube channel, a YouTube style focus rather than TV, and to talk about certain topics that people will be interested in. For myself, it was great to hear Leona talk again, just because I've worked with Leona for a long, long time, and Hochi somewhere here as well too. And this is, I often said I continue making content for my peeps, my Taiwanese Americans. Even though I target Taiwanese Americans, is also the idea of anyone who may be interested in Taiwan and creating a more basic understanding of what Taiwan is. I'm gonna quickly zoom through a couple more things. Essentially, we did different topics such as talking about the language of Taiwanese Hokkien, the languages, and I focus a lot of my time into figuring out how to talk about controversial topics without being controversial. This was maybe the one video that I sat next to the PR team and they're really scared of me making. It was talking about the Taiwanese flag, both on the international stage, but also within Taiwan as well too. If anyone knows the Republic of China flag, the red, white, and blue, the white sun and everything, that flag is often causes a lot of controversy within Taiwan itself. But I believe that there was a way to talk about this. And ultimately, if watch the video, at the very end of it, I do say that nearly any flag in the world has controversial pasts, and it's part of it. And if you take something like America, where Colin Kaepernick decides not to stand for the flag of the anthem, he decides not to stand because the flag stood for something that was the oppression of Black Americans, but yet he took a knee as a sign of respect for the veterans that fought for the flag. And so it's hopefully offering with more different perspectives to something that might seem a little more controversial. Obviously, something like the flag being taken in the Olympics is a major topic that we approached as well too. So what does a digital content lead really do, or what do I do day to day? It really came about. An example was kind of the launch of our Instagram. It was about 2 to 3 months before the elections within Taiwan, and we realized that one, our Instagram was we didn't have an Instagram, not for news anyways. And so in order to prove, there was a huge concern from the management about how much resource we could put to create Instagram. And so I took my tech learnings and I started doing prototyping. YouTube at that time had launched YouTube Shorts, which is essentially short form vertical format videos. So we started doing those. We also started using what was called community posts on YouTube, which is essentially looks like Instagram posts. And we did a variety of them. And we did it for about 3 months to kind of test things out, and then ultimately did a presentation to my managers and talking about, like, hey, this is what our Instagram could look like. And lo and behold, nearly a year later, our Instagram has grown out, and that's kind of how we approached this topic. So overall, as a digital content lead, my job isn't necessarily to do the day-to-day content, although I do miss doing it, and occasionally I do hop out to do it. But it's about creating the next steps to figure out how to find the platforms, find the strategies to go about to push for the next form of presenting Taiwan stories to the world in a way that can reach the largest amount of audience and to reach the audience that we're hoping for. So in the end, this is all really just to be part of the conversation. So Hopefully that was within the right amount of time range. As mentioned before, I am always open to talk and meet with more people. I'm actually, after today's panel, I'm actually going to Harvard to meet with a Taiwanese and a Taiwanese American and a Tibetan American to talk more about what they're doing, and then see how we can do more content and stories, maybe talking about their stories as well too. So if there's any interest or any questions, you can ask today, but if you miss the opportunity today, feel free to email me at erictsai@taiwanpost.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric, for that very comprehensive, informative, and contextualized overview of Taiwan Plus and your role in it. Just to keep the conversation going along, and just a reminder to our audience, if you have questions that you want to pose during the Q&A, feel free to start putting them in the chat, or you can still marinate a bit and think through what you might want to ask. So Kaylee, please take it away.
Cool. Well, great talk, Eric. It's good hearing your whole story too. We were friends, but I don't actually get to hear your story. So, I actually the first time I came, I grew up in Eastern Washington, small town. I think we're like under 3,000 people. So, and then I always was kind of intrigued by big cities, but I didn't know, what to do. But I had a transitional time when my dad passed away, and I decided, I need to make some kind of change. And in 2008, I visited one of my friends that was actually out in Taiwan. He was actually a Mormon missionary. And he had left the church and decided after he finished his mission, he moved out. He stayed in Taiwan and went to Taida and studied poli-sci. And so I came and visited him, and I was like, originally my plan was to go to China and continue my studies there, because I wanted to go. My original plan out of university is I kind of wanted to start going into the direction of going into maybe public sector, something like that. Maybe working with the government. I kind of wanted to pursue that. I wasn't really thinking doing media or anything like that. It wasn't on my radar at all. And but I did grow up shooting lots of stupid videos with my cameras, just like a lot of kids do. Anytime I had a chance to have a video camera, I would do that. So when I came out to Taiwan my first time, I brought a camera, and I did one of the most Taiwanese things you could do that's on a Taiwanese bucket list. I got on a scooter and I rode all the way around the island, and I just took pictures around the whole island. Like literally, I huandao. And so I couch surfed, which is like, I don't know if it's that popular anymore, but like I stayed with different families. So I got a really cool local experience. And it was like, I really fell in love with the people, the scenery, the food. For me, like it's hit and miss. I think I got a bad, taste in my mouth from stinky tofu. I've tried so many times to like fall in love with it. I'm sorry, guys. I know you guys are very proud of it, but I'm as much as you love it. I tried. I can't. So after a couple of years, like I did a couple of times bouncing back, where I'd come back and forth and everything. I'd come back for a month or two, go back to the States, and then in 2011, I decided to move out. And at that time, I still was trying to figure things out with one of my friends. That same friend, we were talking about opening up a company. We got it going. But at the same time, I was also shooting photos. And shortly after I moved here, I got picked up like helping taking photos for this magazine. And it was basically it was kind of the opposite of what I do now, but it was kind of introducing, a lot of it was like foreign lives in Taiwan. It was kind of like a cultural exchange thing. I mean, it did both ways, but the magazine really kind of focused on like kind of a cultural exchange. So I really got kind of thrown into that pretty early on once I got to Taiwan, like actually moving here maybe like 2 months in. And then from there, one of my friends' coworkers, we were out hanging out, and she was telling me that like actually her sister's a producer. She produces documentaries for like Net Geo, Discovery Channel, and all those things. Because like a lot of them, it's like you get wipe out. Like basically those channels will basically put out like a call, and it's all sponsored by the government too. The government puts out money, but they'll put out a call like, we want to make a documentary about this, like and then so Net Geo and Discovery, one of those, they'll different production companies will bid on it and give their kind of pitch for it. And so that's what she was doing. And then she's like, hey, like, I want to get you on. And so at that point in time, I got super lucky. Like, I mean, I'm professionally doing photography for like a couple months, and I got hooked on with Net Geo, like shooting photos for Net Geo. And my first project was I was shooting it was on fish, Taiwanese fishing industry and fish. Like, it was just like comprehensive fish. So there was like commercial fishing, there was like the fish pet trade, and there was the science of fish. So like one of the weirdest things I shot that project. So I've shot everything from catching fish to people breeding fish for pets. And then I shot a cornea surgery on a rabbit where they replaced a rabbit's eyes cornea with a fish scale. And so, like, you know, you get to see all these things that you would never see if you aren't in the film industry, if you aren't doing documentary stuff. You get exposed to so many things and you meet so many people. It's like a big window into these worlds of people and places and things that you never get to see. After that, like my next project with them that was rather large that she actually gave me pretty big reins on was like she put me on video, because at the same time I had met some other people that did video. I don't know if you guys have heard of Frank Yang. He's a Taiwanese American guy, kind of crazy, but a lot of fun. But he's a violin player and performing artist. He used to sculpt and everything, incredible stuff. But he got me into video, and he's this crazy YouTuber. And she saw I was doing okay with video too, and then she put me on this Discovery Channel project, and it was doing like the whole coming of age story of different indigenous tribes in Taiwan. So we did Amis, like boys coming of age, becoming a man kind of ceremony, the Bakuronai, becoming adults. And then we did Rukai, like the dating kind of, what would you call that? Like, so the process of like courting a girl in the Rukai tribe. And then in Taiwan, we did like marriage rituals. So it's kind of like this whole progression of like, okay, you're a boy to a man, then a man courting a girl, and a guy marrying a Taiwan girl, which was also interesting because that was like also another intercultural relationship, because the guy was actually Chinese, like Chinese ethnically. So really cool seeing all that stuff. Again, that brought me into all their worlds. And to be honest, to this day, some of my best friends in Taiwan come from that project. And I think that's another beautiful thing. Like I said before, it's like you get put into these worlds and stuff. I see these people that I shot on that first documentary project. I see them, I go down south probably 5-6 times a year, go hang out with them. I go to their weddings, their kids have babies. I give the hongbao, all that stuff. When they come to Taipei, they stay at my house. Really cool opportunity to do that. And so then I just kept on doing that for a little bit. My career, in documentary really blossomed. And then I also, at the same time, there was a really cool platform that was opening up in the United States that was trying to promote Asia and Asian American culture through music and different arts. And that was 88 Rising. I don't know if you guys remember 88 Rising. It was actually, it was something completely new for the United States. People were hungry for it. I know, like, K-pop was kind of starting to boom in the United States, but I think 88 Rising played a huge part in that transition of really bringing the eyes to it, because they took American rappers and showed them, like, like Rich Brian, like him performing his songs. Like, they don't see him at first. They listen to the music, like, man, who is this? And then they see him like, dude, that guy's Asian. And their mind is blown, because this guy sounds like he's Indonesian. Rich Brian was Indonesian. He's of Chinese descent, but he's Indonesian, and he grew up on the internet. He came from Vine, I think is where he started out, was on Vine. And it legitimized it, because you'd see all these big name rappers responding to Taiwanese American, Chinese American with like Higher Brothers, Keith Ape from Korea, Josh Pan was from the United States, but he's Taiwanese American. Frank Yang was Taiwanese American. just it was an awesome time to see like this blossoming and to be a part of that very start. I wasn't consistent with them very long, but I worked with them for a while, and then at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of shit kind of intertwining in my career at this time because I'm still freelance, and I think in a lot of this, when you're doing this stuff, it's be freelance. Where the opportunity comes, stick with it because there's going to be stuff coming from everywhere. There was another company in Taiwan popping up called Black Buddha. I don't know if you guys ever saw that. That was a while ago though, but they were doing like city guides through video. So we start out in Taipei and we'd shoot like all the cool food spots, all the cool tour spots, and yeah, all that kind of stuff. And then we went to Hong Kong, Tokyo, Seoul, and Thailand, and we did these city guides where we would introduce these people to the people, the places to shop, all these things like that. And the thing is that there's so many platforms out there and different avenues that you can do in media. Video is such inclusive, and I don't know how to explain it, but basically you can get into almost anything. I got to eat so much cool food and travel so many places early on in my career because of all the opportunities that Taiwan provided me. When I first logged on, you said like, this is crazy. You have all these things on your intro. Taiwan gave me all those opportunities. Taiwan is such a small island, but everybody's looking at Taiwan at the same time. And I've been living here permanently for 13 years, and it's given me opportunities from building that, start of my resume. Now I've worked with 60 Minutes. When Leslie Stahl came here, I shot Leslie Stahl here, which I grew up watching Leslie Stahl. That was like, I think I've shot so many cool things, but seeing this news anchor that I grew up from when I was, in my diapers, and now I'm working beside her, that was mind-blowing to me. Yeah, so I also did a lot of music video stuff. My stuff isn't all documentary. To be honest, I don't do that much documentary anymore. The majority of my work right now is doing marketing and content for Netflix. But I still do pick up documentary projects here and there. Vice and Vox have been amazing to me. Vice, as you know, has had some transitions in the last year and a half, unfortunately. But the beauty is there's other platforms that are picking up the slack, like Taiwan Plus. And this is something where, Eric, if you have an idea, you can go to somebody like Eric. And this goes for all these platforms. If you go to Vice or Vox, you just need to know the Chuankou. How do you say Chuankou? The
go-to person. Yeah,
the go-to person. The go-to person, you just need to get some kind of contact. And it doesn't even have to be that specific company. Say like, somebody in one company, but you want to pitch something to another company. If you have a cool idea for any of these like platforms, you can go to them and just be like, I want to make something about this. And almost all of them will listen to your idea and give you feedback and say yes or no, or send you to somebody that could help you produce it. Because all these platforms, all these streaming platforms, all this digital media brands, they need content. And they need people that have these diverse views of the world that are empathetic and flexible in their mind and thinking and creative to make content with them. That kind of brings me to one of my next subjects, is that there are some pain points to making content in Taiwan and about Taiwan. Everybody has kind of their perception of what Taiwan is and the situation in Taiwan. The majority of the time when I first start working with a producer that hasn't come to Taiwan before, and this goes for Vice, Vox, almost any of them, they have these perceptions that like, it's actually like we're at the brink of war. And then some of them will try and create tension in their stories and kind of misrepresent what is really happening. And a lot of times you have to reel back. their imagination and really let them try and see through the people that are here. I'm not Taiwanese American, I'm not Taiwanese, but I have this like third culture sort of experience because I've been here for over a third of my life. But I know Taiwan well enough that the perception that people have of Taiwan is actually oftentimes just what they see on CNN or Fox News, that, you know, actually the people in Taiwan, they're kind of indifferent to a lot of what's happening just because they're so used to what's the tensions between Taiwan and China. But that brings me to one other next question or next topic that I would like to just kind of touch on a little bit, that people in Taiwan are not a monolith either. There's such a diverse amount of people and their backgrounds that their families have been here for hundreds of years. There's people that have been here for, or even thousands, you know, if you go back to the Yenzuming, the indigenous people. And then you have the people that migrated from Fujian province. And then you have people that came here, you know, during the 40s and 50s and everything. And then we also have all this colonization influence too, where there's like Japan and the Dutch and everything that all have laid their mark, and even the United States when they used to have military bases here. So the identity in Taiwan is very complex. There's, you know, we have Hakka people, we have like Fujian people, we have people from all over China, then there's indigenous people. It's just a really interesting place. So all of them have a different perspective about politics, about what it means to be Taiwanese. And that goes for Taiwanese Americans as well. If you talk to a Taiwanese American that grew up in Taiwan and one that grew up in the United States, their perception is going to be completely different. So of course, my perception of how I represent things to maybe the foreign media might not be exactly the same. So that's where I often approach people like Eric for a second opinion, where he also catches my mistakes or something like that. So yeah, I don't know. Do I have anything else? Oh, I want to say one more thing, that Taiwanese people need to be super proud of, and Taiwanese Americans and people that are third culture kids and individuals need to be super proud of what Taiwan has done. Because if you look at after martial law was lifted and that whole transition period, some of the best filmmakers from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s came from Taiwan or immigrated to Taiwan. Tsai Ming-liang, he was Malaysian and moved to Taiwan when he was 20. And he created some of the most amazing films. I have a quote from him too, that actually I think would resonate with a lot of third culture people. He said he had moving to Taipei when he was 20 had a huge impact on his mind and psyche. Even today, Tsai said, "I feel like I belong neither in Taiwan nor Malaysia. In a sense, I could go anywhere I want and fit in, but I never feel the sense of belonging." And I kind of have that same vibe too, to be honest with you. Like, I actually go back to the States now. I don't necessarily feel like I 100% belong there anymore because Taiwan has rubbed off on me so much. Taiwan feels very much like home to me now too, but I don't look like I belong here. So I stand out like a sore thumb. Going back, sorry, I'm kind of bouncing all over, but also the Mando pop scene here coming out of martial law. There was like all of Asian pop music was basically like the really cool stuff was coming out of Taiwan. And there's still today a large portion of pop music in Taiwan today is coming from Taiwanese Americans or Australian Taiwanese and stuff like that. So I think use Taiwan as an opportunity to really express yourself, use your identity, express yourself. If you have an opportunity, come to Taiwan and create art about your identity and who you are, and discover yourself. Yeah, that's about what I got.
Well, what a wonderful way to summarize to some of these discussion points, like the notes on pain points and your own personal experiences being in third culture communities. And I think this is just really fruitful grounds for conversation here. So I'm going to now transition to Q&A here. I've got a couple of questions myself just to get the discussion started. So I'm just going to prompt one and then refer to the questions in the chat. If we have time for the second one, then I'll prompt that to round us out. So first question I'll ask for both of you, as folks, please do submit questions in the chat, and I'll be sure to take a look and prompt them in the discussion. But first question. So Kaylee, something that you mentioned in your remarks that really stuck out to me was the notion of localization and the opportunities afforded to you being in documentary and filmmaking. You were able to see things that maybe doesn't always appear in front of large theater screens or in cameras, or what others may see, even those who may visit for Taiwan for different lengths of time. And both of you touched on this notion of these gaps between what's happening in Taiwan and how external audiences are watching or even projecting what they think of Taiwan and their interpretation of Taiwan. I did some work on this idea of a discourse gap of how people in Taiwan talk about Taiwanese society, politics, and how specifically folks in DC to consider Taiwan. And it's exactly to your earlier point, Kelly, of those who do go end up thinking we're in a high tension point and we can't have, that's the framing of folks coming in there. So the first question is, where do you feel that recently there's been work to kind of chip away at this maybe visual discourse gap using the lens of film in this discussion case, but is there a narrowing of the gaps of understanding between what life is like in Taiwan for those that live or very closely connected to it, to those who are external to Taiwan but still might want to visit or otherwise have important connections? Is this gap narrowing, or are there new gaps that are coming up because of what the new platforms and visual media are focusing on? So just kind of on that point of the discourse gap or the visual media gap.
I'll start with this one, and then you can jump in, Eric, after me, and tackle my idea and say I'm wrong. But I do think that people in general are starting to get a better understanding of Taiwan. And I think it's for two reasons: that it is just so much in the news now, because like kind of the running joke is everybody thinks that it's either Thailand or just a place in China. And I think now that it's always in the news, people are at least getting an idea of what Taiwan is on a superficial level. And also the chip industry has really brought a lot of attention to Taiwan. So people at least have a base understanding. And I think there is a lot more work that's tackling identity that's available to viewers online and just general life. Like I think you mentioned you saw some stuff on indie music in Taiwan. Which one was that? Do you know what the program was about specifically?
I'm blanking on the name, but it was it felt kind of documentary in nature, like a longer form video.
It was
it
was a Taiwan Plus documentary that we bought about the indie rock music. I forgot what it's called either.
Cool.
It just looks like a hand. Looks like the logo from The Voice.
Oh, I remember that one. Okay. Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah. They interviewed a lot of different artists and stuff like that. Yeah, so I mean, there's opportunities for people to really dig in and see a little bit in specific topics that they're interested in. Like you said, you're interested in indie music. There's content out there that talks about indie music in Taiwan, and that gives you a whole nother perspective of what Taiwan is and who the people of Taiwan are.
Yeah, I mean, just adding on to that, it's like I got hit by a Instagram ad yesterday. Actually, it was by Elephant Gym, which is another indie music band as well too. And in it wasn't like I get hit by ads sometimes, and I always think about what this ad's trying to portray. And I've been hit by ads where it's going like, this is like a very Taiwan music scene. My Instagram algorithm is way out of whack because it's both like very Taiwanese and also very American. But this one was, testimonials coming from people visiting, going to their concerts and everything. And they were all, it seemed like it was a US tour kind of these vox pops, these testimonials. And that kind of shows exactly like, as Kayla was saying, like, in different scenes, there are people who are understanding that Taiwan is, when I started with OFT or of Taiwan, we used to joke that our tagline was Taiwan is more than bubble tea and night markets. And I think this has definitely been shown out. And I think it's also really has to do with this generation of Taiwanese as well too, more willing to express themselves and go into different avenues and talk about those areas as well too. And I'm just going to use this as a topic to answer Tim's question that I'm seeing on the chat as well too. Of course, there's an interest in documenting history of international Taiwanese diaspora affecting Taiwanese democratization. And I think these are the kind of topics that we always want to talk about and highlight as well too, because as Kaylee was saying, and even Richard, you're kind of asking, is what the public perception of Taiwan is. But to be very fair, even like because I even though Kaylee comes to me to ask about Taiwanese perspective, like Kaylee said, is not a monolith. So I'm also asking a whole lot of other people about what certain topics mean and so forth. And I came to realize that even within Taiwanese, they don't really know what Taiwan is about. Either, well, not really like they know their piece, but not all the other pieces. And that's where it really comes down to. And it's one of the biggest problems that I actually hit myself is because from a point of view that's trying to talk about Taiwan from an overview and also appealing to an international audience, there are times when we tell stories and people within Taiwan will be mad at us because we presented something that they did not perceive as representing Taiwan. And this comes in all different areas. And this is sometimes something that like I myself I think I've met and talked to Tim multiple times, Leona, Ho Chi. I was very involved with FAPA. There's literally a photo of me like reaching for Taiwanese to join the United Nations. So I ran with a group that was more Taiwan independent centric ideology, but it took me time to learn about other perceptions of Taiwan. That the reason why I briefly showed a video about Taiwanese Hokkien, the references in the video I talk about, the references to it being colloquially called Taiwanese. Is it a thing or not? And again, there is no right or wrong, but to address that there are these different perceptions of Taiwan is something that is very impactful. And but going back, like Tim, yeah, I would love to do that. Let's talk some more. I know Taiwan Plus has worked with you a couple of times in a couple of stories as well too. But the hardest thing that we usually have, especially talking about Taiwanese American diaspora topic, is not having a film crew here, and trying to hire a film crew here is extremely expensive. And also Kaylee has been on the other side of this. We work together, and it's like the banking system in Taiwan is absolutely horrendous. So the biggest blocker to Taiwanese telling the stories to the world is the banking system, but that's a whole nother topic.
Excellent, excellent. We still have about 8 minutes left, so I'm going to prioritize the questions in the chat. Also, great to mention Elephant Gym. They actually came to DC. I went to their concert here. It was their last on the North American tour. And Tel Cheng, the guitarist, he mentioned in a moment of inspiration at the concert, I'm really happy that I'm holding this guitar and not a rifle. And that is part of their statement of what Taiwan is for them and their opportunity to share what Taiwan, the meaning of Taiwan and its place and its society and in this concert space. I just really love that moment, and it is also very punk, so very, very cool all around. Eric, you already addressed parts of this question, but maybe Kaylee can also jump in a bit. Back to Tim's question about interest in documenting specifically on the history of international Taiwanese diaspora affecting Taiwan's democratization and the impact that Taiwanese Americans had on Taiwan in the 1960s to 1990s. So if you just wanted to add some more thoughts specifically on documenting, sorry, that specific history. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
I don't have a whole lot of experience in that specific topic, doing documentary, but I'm sure that there's some stuff out there. But yeah, I haven't really touched on that, so I don't want to really speak on that specifically.
Yeah, no worries. And if Eric or Kaylee, if either of you have recommendations on further viewings, then feel free to drop them in the chat as well. Eric, did you want to comment anything more on that, or
No, I do know that Pamela Hong from the Taiwanese American communities as well too is working on something around that area. Maybe not specifically about Taiwan's democratization, but there's some aspects in that. I think something like lessons from Ama or something like that. I'm not 100% sure, but I will, once I find it, I'll drop it in the chat for a little bit. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Next question is from Rebecca Leo. What advice do you have for Taiwanese Americans who want to help share stories about Taiwan and be part of the conversation? What are the ways that we as Taiwanese Americans can help Americans and people around the world learn more about Taiwan? Maybe in addition to advocating for reforming the banking system, but if there are other ways that can be meaningful for Taiwanese Americans to be involved as well.
On the most straight point of view, if you're, please contact Taiwan Plus, contact me. But I do think a large part of it is something that I've seen. I don't know if it's changed throughout the years because, identity is a thing that changes really quickly, generation to generation, especially as the Taiwanese identity, Taiwanese American identity is more solidifying, sort of say. But in the past, there's been this lack of understanding, or rather a piecemeal understanding of Taiwanese history. I had this experience once where I was talking to a friend of a friend, and we had dinner, and she said, "Hey, Eric, can you tell me about like Taiwan?" And I was like, "Well, that's a lot of things. What do you mean by Taiwan?" She goes like, "Can you tell me like about like Taiwan and China and what that thing is?" And I was like, "Wait, your roommate's Taiwanese American. Has she never told you anything about that?" And she goes like, "Oh, it's complicated." And that's the typical thing that we hear, is that, "Oh, it's complicated." And it's true, and I'm not expecting every Taiwanese American to be like a well-versed historian in Taiwan history. I'm still learning myself, but it's to know the certain bits and pieces that can help with showing the topics of Taiwan's history. And it's not like you don't start from 1600s every single time, right? It's also finding that one piece of topic that kind of resonates. For example, I used to say that United States Medicare was such a universal healthcare was such a big topic within United States. And no matter, and this again, this no matter which political spectrum you're from, whether you're Republican or Democrat, the concept of healthcare, you can use Taiwan to argue either side, whether it is the convenience of it and the availability of it, or simply saying that even healthcare in Taiwan is it's, even though it's publicly funded, it is privately run. So there are sometimes companies trying to cut the costs of it, and leading to overpaid workers, overpaid doctors, which leads to a lack of doctors, overpaid nurses, and so forth. So I think it's a large part of it, if it's the smallest part, Rebecca, is to just learn a little bit more, just to know that basis of basic history. And that's also the part of the reason why I made Taiwan Explained, is to be able to help create this content, this inventory of information that can be used. And then, as Tim is putting a great response to it, is organizations like FAPA, organizations that are helping to push out. And again, this is on multiple levels. Like FAPA is a group that is going directly to congressional aides. That's something that is very, lack of a better word, hardcore. But also, or rather, there's a lot more time and attention needed to do that kind of level of stuff. But you also have your local Taiwanese American professional communities. If you're still in college, you have your Taiwanese American student associations, or whichever variations of names. And it's working at those levels and talking to more conversations. And that's really the best way, is just to learn about yourself so that you can talk about it with other people and resonate with other people.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is like learn more about yourself is actually through, if you want to share, learn more about yourself and make that part of what you're creating. And it might seem like the Taiwanese American community is really small, but it's actually the amount of people that are actually creating content about it is small, so they're not as visible. So it's like Eric looks on here and he's like, there's a lot of familiar faces and names. Even me, like I start to know, quite a few people that are like bigger names in Taiwanese American and Chinese American communities that surprise me, that like, how is everybody connected? And it's just the people that are creating content. It's that small of a pool, but everybody's thirsty to hear about it. So if you explore yourself and share that journey and share topics that you want on any platform, Taiwanese American are thirsty for it, and anybody else that's interested in Asian politics and identity are gonna just latch onto that as well. Use, Instagram, any of the reels or anything like that, even, and do those things, because that's like, there's like the amount, and TikTok, like that's huge. I know short form stuff, but even just start experimenting with that. If you want to share more about American and to American audience or foreign audience about Taiwan, explore your own journey, explore the Taiwanese American journey, and share that on those social media platforms in some kind of video format. And it can be anything. It can be simple, but be authentic to yourself.
I think just to add on to that really quickly, even my own journey into Taiwan, doing Taiwan stuff. Jenny, I mentioned before in my presentation, she asked me, she was like, "Yeah, but like, who are we to talk about Taiwan?" And I was like, "We are the exact people to talk about it. We're showing by example the people who are looking into these topics. We're not I do a disclaimer at all my talks to say, like, I'm not a historian. I'm technically not a journalist. I just learn about this, and so I'm open to being challenged. And this is also a shout out to all the small creators that are out there. I met that Taiwanese gal is a woman she just graduated and she was trying to teach Taiwanese language via Instagram. You have things like Chloe Shi, that is Taiwanese American, that got laid off by Twitch and gained talking a lot about both her heritage but also like work culture as well too. So I think there is the concept of not being afraid to fail, which is like the most generic thing that you can possibly think about. But that's where it goes back down to, if ever talking about content. Yeah.
But I think that's one of the hardest things that a lot of Taiwanese people and Asians in general have, is the fear of failure, because they're trained and drilled to be perfect, and they're scared to lose face. But that's actually what's going to get you the most largest voice, is tripping a couple times, but just getting your stuff out there. Nothing's going to be perfect the first time, but at least people see it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that really that point of self-discovery and connection with others, more conversation, more voices, resonates really well with what Leona was also sharing earlier in her keynote. We're just about at time. I do wanted to highlight this last question, which I think perhaps both of you have already touched on it in the response you just gave, but just a quick 30 seconds maybe from each of you, from Christine Lin, who along with Jonathan Shi is going to moderate the roundtable later in the program, and she's also an incredible organizer and co-convener of this very symposium and our topic of Taiwanese American identity. So Christine's question is, how do you prioritize and decide which stories of Taiwan to tell that will resonate with target audiences? And maybe that can be an expansion of self-discovery, or talk about what you're living through or going through. But just a quick 30-second thought from each of you on that question.
30 seconds from me. I think it's really knowing what kind of pain points that people have. Just one of the topics that Kaylee and I worked on, and it's being shelved, but it will come out at some point, is a topic about like the lack of talking about sex within Asian cultures, or this is a topic that resonates throughout the world. What does sexual repression or lack of talking about sex is in Taiwan? Because I know that's a topic that will resonate no matter what culture you're from. And so that's a lot of times just understanding where your target audience is and hanging out with them, asking them questions to see where their pain points are coming from, and to help make content that will either address their curiosities or entertain them. But it's really understanding the target audience before even picking the stories, knowing what they want to watch rather than what you want to tell.
For me, I'm not tied to a specific platform, so I actually kind of get to be a little bit more pick and choose on what I do, which is nice because every platform is a little different on what they want. So I can kind of pick a platform to do whatever I want. So a lot of my stuff is like, if I'm interested in something, I'll approach somebody, a different outlet on what I want to do. So for the most part, you can kind of pick what you want, but then you pick your platform based off of what you want to do it on.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for both of you, Eric and Kaylee, for your great insights on documentary filmmaking and even a little more, and how these creative arts are powerful mediums for negotiating, conveying, celebrating Taiwanese and Taiwanese American identities. Everyone, please join me in thanking our great speakers for this session. And I know we ran a little bit over time, so apologies for that, but we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. We'll reconvene at 3:20 p.m. DC time for our next panel, being moderated by Adrian Wu, on the topic of creating artworks as a means to explore identities. So please come back and join us in about 5 minutes, and we'll continue this great symposium. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the second panel of George Washington University's event, Taiwanese Americans, Voices Through the Arts, a Taiwan Humanities Virtual Symposium. So my name is Adrian Wu. I'm a program manager at the Global Taiwan Institute, and my focus is on soft power, cultural diplomacy, cultural policy. I also have a podcast at GTI called Taiwan Salon, where I talk to a bunch of different people about Taiwan's cultural policy, how we can promote Taiwan to international audiences. So I guess I want to just explain a little bit about my background so everyone can understand how my approach to moderating the panel. But I am also Taiwanese American myself. My mother is American, my dad is Taiwanese, so I'm mixed, half white American, half Taiwanese. And I did not grow up speaking Chinese, so I definitely have felt very disconnected to the Taiwanese American community in a lot of ways, just having this different background. But I think as we've been talking about in the previous panels, we really have, we've really been bringing together different versions of what Taiwanese identity means. And, I think as I was growing up, I didn't always understand what it meant to be Taiwanese. So when I got older, it was really interesting to try to learn what it meant to be Taiwanese and how I should define my own Taiwanese-ness. And as I was trying to learn myself and go to other people, I realized that, hey, maybe we're all kind of still trying to figure out what it means to be Taiwanese, and we're all creating this identity together. So I think that it was a very powerful moment for me. And I think that I myself am still learning about Taiwanese-ness. And that is why I'm so happy to be joined by two very distinguished panelists. So I'll just introduce them before we jump into their presentations. So first we have Felicia Liang. She is an artist and printmaker based in the Bay Area, California. Her colorful work explores her identity and emotions and how the cultures and communities she is around uniquely shape them. She draws to tell stories and establish her place in the world through whimsical food, still life, and cityscape illustrations. She's known for work celebrating her Taiwanese American identity and uplifting local Chinatowns in the Bay Area and New York. Her illustrations have been featured on TripAdvisor, Eater, and the LA Times, and her products have been featured in Refinery 29, Glamour, and the New York Magazine. She's had 2 solo exhibitions in both New York and San Diego, California, and regularly showcases her work at craft markets throughout the year. And I've really enjoyed seeing her use of color in her prints. I think her Riso prints are really beautiful. I also love the coloring books that she's been putting out. I think that's a great way to also get engaged with the art as well. And then our second panelist is Isabel Engler. So Isabel is a board certified music therapist specializing in the NICU and pediatrics. Engler has performed at and attended piano festivals in San Francisco, San Diego, New York, Tokyo, Paris, and Italy. Additionally, she's worked with educators and artists as a collaborative pianist. Her most recent works are the fire organ and somatic sculpture produced by Guerrilla Science, and Andantino, a chamber music concert series designed for families. Experienced in working with hospitalized children and caregivers, children with autistic spectrum disorder, and adults with neurological impairments, Engler desires to use music to serve children and families. Engler resides in Southlake, Texas, with her husband and 2 daughters. So I will give the floor over to our 2 presenting panelists. And just as a logistical note, I think everyone has been really great thus far, so maybe I don't even need to say this, but please remember to turn off your microphones, especially while the panels are presenting. And after the panelists give their presentations, then I will present some moderator questions, and then I will go through any questions that are in the chat. So please feel free to send any questions you have throughout the presentations to the chat. All right, thank you. So I think we're starting with Felicia first, is that right? And then Isabel.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to pull up my deck. Oh no. I'm probably a little, how do I? I'm so sorry. I think it's not letting me share right now.
Should we maybe start with Isabel first and then come back to you, Felicia?
Sure, yeah. I don't want to hold
Okay.
this up.
Is that all right with you, Isabel?
Yes, let me
Okay, all right.
pull out my slides as well. I have it open, so let me go ahead and do that.
Oh, okay.
Give me a thumbs up if you can see this. Okay, thank you. Great. And I will just make it into a presentation mode. All right, so my name is Isabel Engler. Thank you so much for having me here today. As Adrian mentioned, I'm a board certified music therapist, and I'm an author of 4 music-based books in both Chinese and English. And most importantly, I am Taiwanese American, so I'm so honored to be here to talk about the intersection of my music therapy work, cultural identity, and the arts in general. And so I always like to start off with some fun facts about me, so you know who I am briefly. And all of these points will sort of tie into this intersection that I'm speaking of today. So I was born and raised in Taipei, Taiwan, immigrated to the US when I was 14, and I naturalized as American at age 19. I was classically trained as a pianist first, and later in life, like 10 years out of college, and discovered the world of music therapy and felt that it was a calling for me to pursue a different degree and board certification and use music to help others towards healing and restoration. So I'm actually NICU music therapy certified, and I built the NICU music therapy program at one of the largest healthcare systems in the state of Texas, Baylor University Medical Center, in their level 4 NICU. And I'm an author of 4 music-based books for children, and I'll get to more details about this later. And I'm a mom of 2 bilingual children, and I brought in some former business experience as a product manager in Silicon Valley. And so for me, I'm on a mission to empower kids and families through music in so many different ways, but that's ultimately sort of like a calling and things I hope to do to And I will sort of start off with music therapy work, and then the second part, I will talk about the books as they sort of tie into the theme today about how, the voices through the arts, but also how arts can help us connect with one another, and storytelling as well too. And so one of my most recent research in music therapy as a music therapist is to explore the role of music therapy in building resilience in the mental health of gifted students. And sort of my why here is that I grew up in Taiwan and actually attended a gifted and talented program in music in Taipei. And I would say that growing up, I didn't really like talking about this because I always felt that my parents would tell other people, oh, she attended this program, 音乐班, as a way to show off. But in reality, it was actually a very competitive program. And I was never, I always felt like I wasn't good enough, even though we went through very rigorous training and we were touring around the island. As an orchestra, we played for the president at age 10. But for me, that training itself was sort of, it brought a lot of different perspectives, and I'll get to more of that. And so I saw struggles from family and friends, not in music, but mentally, I would say, right? Like some people have anxiety, some people struggle with depression. And I now have a child in a gifted program in the US. So for me, like as a music therapist who was already working to support people in psychosocial areas, I started getting like inquired by other families and parents about how music therapy can benefit people who may not have a diagnosis, right? May not be sick in the hospital. And so I started becoming very curious about how gifted children may also benefit from music therapy. And for me, pursuing this clinical research, one of the biggest reasons is that I actually personally know 3 people who have committed suicide out of the gifted program that I attended. And so this by itself can be one presentation, and I actually just returned from Berlin, Germany on this presentation. So I will sort of go a lot faster just to touch on some of the highlights to share about academic research. But we'll get to sort of, and for me, this is sort of a passion because I know so many talented people and so many gifted people from Taiwan, and there are a lot of very accomplished classical musicians in Taiwanese American population. So I hope that this can be an area that can help support our Taiwanese American community as well too. And so in the research, some of the key areas in lit review includes, what it means to be gifted students, the emotional intensity that comes with it, the asynchronous development in their growth. Some of the top common mental health struggles may include unhealthy perfectionism, anxiety, depression, and suicidal behavior, as well as underachieving. And so we sort of examine what resilience means, various psychological support to gifted students that exist today, which includes talk therapy, play therapy, and some creative arts therapy, but there's actually not a lot. And what music therapy means and how music therapy actually works to support people with anxiety a lot, just there's nothing in the gifted student population, which led to the pursuit of this research, really. And as you may imagine or may have heard of, unmanaged mental health struggles could lead to eating disorders, depression, underachievement, substance abuse, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, psychosomatic disorders, and even suicide. And so I went down the rabbit hole to sort of answer some of the questions I was hoping to answer, right? Does music therapy change short-term resilience in emotional regulation, coping with social emotional struggles, and self-expression in gifted students? How effective is music therapy in reducing anxiety in gifted students? And so I wanted to sort of share using this example of how effective it can be to use music to express yourself. I was working with children in gifted programs, but the example here, we're sort of choosing from these emojis, and I facilitated and accompanied the participant while the participant was able to improvise what they think that, how to express that emotion. So the first example here is sorrow. And now I'll touch on more after I play the audio. then I will play a contrast to that. But this participant was only 7 years old. And the next one is done by someone who's only 10 years old. All right, playing for short clips, but I hope you can kind of feel the difference, right, between the first theme, sorrow, and the second theme, panic. And I think that this is sort of an example of how much one can express through the arts, especially music, even if they don't have the words to express it, right? Because if you ask a child at age 7, how do you describe sorrow? How do you describe the feeling of panic? They may not be able to tell you, but they could potentially do it so through music and arts. And sort of to highlight sort of the research and the importance of supporting people in these areas, I wanted to quote these quotes that I came across in literature. So the high achiever may pursue excellence through intrinsic motivation or a passion for a subject with no accompanying anxiety. The perfectionist, however, suffers in the pursuit of excellence. As much as perfectionism is about the desire for perfectionism, its motive force is anxiety, the fear of failure, the sense of never being good enough, and of being somehow flawed. Excuse me. And now quickly sort of to share that, like the good news is that the results from this clinical study did show reduced anxiety with statistical significance within the gifted students that participated, particularly using improvisation and songwriting methods. And their resilience score did increase as well, as shown in these visual charts. And when we looked into individual levels, then we did see that some participants show statistically significant increase in resilience, even though not all and not necessary as a group. And before we move on to the non-clinical work and books, I wanted to show you this songwriting example. Again, this is from a teenager, 16-year-old participant. This is a pseudonym, so it's not real name. This is an example of utilizing songwriting to express oneself, right, in emotional regulation. And kind of want to just show you that how songwriting can be a very powerful way to create positive affirmations, to have self-compassions, and even to think through actions and desire to overcome difficulties as well. All right, so moving on to the second part of my presentation. I'm an author of 4 singable books, as I mentioned. And for me, this felt like a mission to empower kids through music, especially to address social emotional wellness and resilience. And some of the inspiration that prompted me to write books, because there's, in Taiwan, there's no short of Chinese books, right? And I feel like in America, there is a lot too, but for me, the inspirations came from teaching my own kids Mandarin and music, and not necessarily finding a suitable material that combines both. And second, most importantly, I was working with a young patient going through cancer treatment. And this family was not from Taiwan, actually. I think they're from China, and they didn't speak any English. They're hospitalized, and they can barely communicate with their basic needs in the hospital, even with translating services. And so I was brought in to work with this child, but music in their native tongue, Mandarin, brought the little girl's personality back alive in the midst of a very challenging medical journey. And at the time, as a therapist, I couldn't find materials, easily available from Amazon, from online. So I started creating these materials. And later on, I thought, you know what, I'm also working with my own children, and I'm sure there are many other educators or therapists hoping to find materials in both languages, in Chinese and English. So I'm going to start writing. So that's sort of the inspiration behind that. And so I started writing one, and I wanted to, kind of complete the series. And so now there's 4 of them, and all of them not all of them, three of them, they're bilingual, and they feature traditional nursery rhymes actually from Taiwan. Some of you may recognize it, right? 捕鱼歌, 造飞机, and 恭喜恭喜. So the fishing song, boat the plane, and Lunar New Year. And so a child may be able to sing along in English or Mandarin, and I utilize pinyin in these books because the original goal for me is to enable somebody who may never have experienced learning Chinese or 注音, the bopomorph, to be able to sound it out as well too, right? And so there's also music scores that are color coded that enable children to play the songs on the piano, xylophone, boomwhackers, and more, even if they've never had private lessons. And so all of these make, hoping to increase the access to the language, to culture in Taiwan, and music in one book. And there's a lot of emotive illustrations and discussion prompts as well to spark conversations between caregivers and children, or between a teacher and the child. So some of the interiors I wanted to show you. For me, this is really taking something that I knew as a child, right? Like everybody sings a song, 百浪滔滔我不怕, but what does it mean to sort of retell the story to the American community, right? Even someone who's never heard the Mandarin version of it. For me, it's not necessarily just a pure translation. For me, writing in English, making a song that can stick with people, it's how to make it rhyme. What's the meaning that I wanted to convey? So like, even my mother, right? When I was starting to write these books, she's like, just go ahead and translate it. I'm sure you can do this really quickly for the second book, third book. But for me, it's important for me that when I sort of reimagine and retell the stories, it's not just a pure translation, but it's actually a standalone song as well too. And so it was also important for me to have, discussion prompts to kids to talk about what it means to celebrate Lunar New Year, for example. And so integrating some aspect of the cultural celebration and really addressing that, each family may not, from family to family, people may not celebrate the same way, right? Dishes that are meaningful to them can look different from family to family as well too. But this is sort of just an example. And again, there's music at the end, so this is kind of what it looks like. So there's both the traditional Chinese character, the pinyin to help people who don't read Chinese to sound it out, and the English as well. And then the right side, there's a little craft for little kids to make a little lantern. And so that's sort of a summary of my two areas of work as a music therapist, but also as an author of these singable books. And so if you have any question, I think we'll have time at the end after Felicia's presentation. I would love to hear any feedbacks and some of these references. Since we're in an academic setting, I figure I would include them. And here's my contact. If you want to chat or say hi, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. I love these books. I really need to recommend them to my sister because she has two children who she's trying to teach Chinese to them. And as two people, me and my sister, that don't really speak Chinese, it's been quite a struggle. So I'm sure that these books will be really helpful. Should we go into Felicia now for the second presentation?
Okay, cool. I think I got this figured out. Do you guys see my screen?
Yeah, it looks good.
All right, cool. Hi, so thank you so much for having me. And Isabel, I'm really in awe of the work that you've done. I see the mission, the passion that you have for it, and I'm in awe that you're doing it for children as well. So we'll segue into mine. Just a quick intro. So my name is Felicia Liang. I'm an artist. I'm an illustrator. I make risograph prints. I'll kind of walk through what that process is. And I'm a proud Taiwanese American. These are just two photos I have of myself, actually in '92. That's me actually in Taiwan in my grandma's house drawing. And then the photo next to it is actually me, I guess, 30 years later in Taiwan in a cafe drawing. Just do a quick agenda, or so you guys kind of see what I'm going to be talking through. I'll do a quick intro about me, my background. I'll talk through my different art phases, and then how that led to my third point, which is the impact of making Taiwanese art. I'll talk a little bit about why specificity matters, especially as a creative, and why me being proudly Taiwanese American has actually been advantageous for me. I'll talk a little bit about standing out at craft markets, kind of having my work out for a broader audience. I'll touch a little bit about why community matters. I think as a Taiwanese American community, we're still pretty small, but quite tight knit, but it's made such a deep impact for me in my work. And then I'll talk a little bit about my own Taiwanese American journey. So a quick timeline, I think Isabel also had a quick timeline. So just to kind of give you guys my background, I was born in Danville, California in the Bay Area. I actually studied economics and psychology at Berkeley, did not do any art. After college, I moved to New York for 9 years, had a bunch of existential crises working as both a consultant and product manager. But then halfway through my career, my corporate career, I started making art on the side. A lot of it was exploring first my Asian American identity, and then the last 2-3 years, I focused more specifically on my Taiwanese American identity. And then in 2019, I took the plunge and I'm now a full-time artist. And so I think kind of like a big talking point I have is just how proudly celebrating and asserting my Taiwanese American identity has helped me both professionally as an artist and as just like my own personal growth as a human being. So I think before I dive into my Taiwanese work, I will go through my earlier art phases to kind of see, and you guys can kind of see how my artwork and voice has evolved. So I started drawing more on the side in 2015, and then my phase one, I call it, is through 2016, 2019. And this is when I started exploring what being Asian American meant to me through my personal work. So this is more broadly what it means to be Asian American. At this point in my life, I actually hadn't thought that much of it. And so I thought art would be a great way to explore it. And so my first major project was called 100 Asians. It was a 100-day project where I illustrated and wrote stories about what growing up Asian American meant to me. I was really burned out from work. I needed creative outlets. So this was kind of like a fun project for me to start both exploring my identity as well as kind of getting into a habit of drawing every day. And so for 100 days straight in 2016, I drew little like food illustrations, illustrations about Chinese American history, all of that, just to kind of explore what being Asian American meant to me. This was a really formative project for me. It was the first time I started sharing my work on social media as well. And I think from there, I was actually able to connect with a ton of other Asian American artists. I think, was it Kaylee and Eric? I caught the tail end of their presentation, but they talked through about the impact of social media. So I think I found a lot of illustrators and artists a couple years ahead of me, also through this project as well. And that project led to a residency at Pearl River Mart in New York. So I took that 100-day project, and my first solo show was actually a year afterwards in New York. So that was really cool to have a space to talk about growing up Asian American. And I also made that project into a book as well. It's successfully funded on Kickstarter. So I think at this point in my life, the solo shows showed me that I could be an artist. I can make art a career. And I think also, I feel like there was a hunger for more Asian American stories. And someone should be on mute. Sorry. Okay, and then I'll just talk through my next project here too. Is so in the same vein of exploring what being Asian American meant. Another phase of my work was I took a lot of well-known Western still life works and then kind of put an Asian American spin to it. So I think here is Roy Lichtenstein's work with still life with goldfish. So I did a still life with 9 koi fish. And then another example here was taking Vincent van Gogh's sunflowers and then creating my own yellow flowers. And then phase 2 is when this is actually during the pandemic, so 2020 and 2021, I started incorporating more Taiwanese elements into some of my work. This phase actually kind of, I would say, kind of crept up on me. I don't think I was consciously doing it, but I think it's some kind of subconscious switch in my work. I think talking about the Asian American experience is great, but I felt like I was casting too wide of a net to appease to too wide of an audience. So I think kind of getting a little bit more specific about myself as a Taiwanese American kind of signified this shift. And so in 2020, I made this piece. It's just mahjong flowers. I love mahjong. the flowers are the flower tiles from the game, and then I kind of put them in cans of childhood drinks. I thought it was just kind of like a silly piece to make, but I really liked it. I think the apple seizure kind of gives it away that I'm Taiwanese. And this print actually, surprisingly, 4 years later, is still one of my best sellers. So this is a really popular print. I think another print I have here is through Merch Aid. So this was kind of a heavy client project. They are an organization that pairs artists with nonprofits to raise money. So I think after the horrific Atlanta spa shootings in 2021, a couple Asian American artists were pulled together to kind of raise money for AAPI Women Lead, a nonprofit based in the Bay Area. And so I think kind of in response to such a horrific incident, I kind of created a little personal shrine just to kind of process that grief. And I think this is probably the first client work where I kind of had overt Taiwanese elements. So we have the pineapple cakes there, we have wax apples, and we have the moon blocks. And so I was proud of this piece, actually. I think a lot of people like it compositionally, but I think Taiwanese people, when they see it, kind of really see the Taiwanese aspect to it. And then this one is actually almost like two on the nose, but in 2020 at KQED, they're a Bay Area-based TV and news station, had an article about Taiwanese food in the Bay. So they just had an article with a list of Taiwanese restaurants to go to. So I kind of got to illustrate that map. So this is an intersection of me celebrating Taiwanese food, small businesses, and I won't go too much into it. I think Adrian had mentioned that I actually do a lot of cityscape work, so that's like a whole nother leg of my work, but this was a cool way to kind of draw a food map of the Bay Area. And then now we get to phase 3. So that is from 2022 till now. So I think within my personal work, I started focusing much more heavily on what being Taiwanese American meant to me, and more overtly celebrating Taiwanese culture, joy, and food through my work. And so I think what kind of kickstarted this was in 2022, I was lucky I got to live in Taiwan for 3 months. So my partner and I were we were very fortunate. We were able to take time off work and go live in Taiwan. We both have family there. And it was the first time we got to explore Taiwan as an adult, and not 100% of our time wasn't just family obligations. So I think being able to see where my parents grew up and kind of make Taiwan like a second, third home for me as an adult had a profound impact on my personal work. And so I think one of my first major projects was these travel journals. Actually, since 2015, with my travels, I'll have travel journals capturing like favorite sites and foods that I've eaten. So when I was in Taiwan, I started just a whole series of favorite foods that I got to eat, favorite neighborhoods, favorite cities, and they kind of became like travel guides. And it was just like a fun way for me to reflect on how much fun I was having. I think I started sharing these on social media. I think I got a little bit of traction from sharing these from both Taiwanese folks and Taiwanese Americans. And I think my 3 months in Taiwan, I met so many people, and a lot of actually expats of Taiwanese Americans in Taiwan, I think just because of my work. So I think Instagram and just putting myself out there. And I think maybe just that the colorful nature and the whimsical nature of this kind of expressed how much pride I had in being Taiwanese and how much I love the food, obviously. And then this was another piece of mine that I made. So I've never actually had rotel until 2022. So I was a little late to the game, but it's one of my favorite meals to have as a large group. You just go with a bunch of friends, order a bunch of hot stir-fry foods. There's like cartons of Taiwan beer, and it's a really rowdy time. So I think I wanted this piece to kind of celebrate just how much I enjoy that meal. And I think it's really fun when I have this print at my craft markets. I think a lot of people are drawn to the color. I think a lot of people get really excited seeing Taiwan beer. I didn't know how excited people got about Taiwan beer, but they did. And so this is a fun piece of mine that I really enjoyed making. And I think I had a fun anecdote was I think earlier this summer, I think there was a guy who, I'll say he was a white man. He really liked this piece. And then when he bought it, he just, in his Venmo, he just wrote like beer poster. So I think I had put so much thought and love into this. Like, I'm glad he liked it. I think he just kind of liked it from a more surface level, but I think it's interesting how like such a specific work, like it can also just be fun too. You know, when you do identity and food work and get really serious, but if it's just fun, someone just likes it, even if they're not my target audience, it can still impact people. And then there's another series here. This was for a group show I did in 2022. And I kind of modeled Dutch Baroque paintings from the 1600s and 1700s, like really serious, moody vanitas art pieces, and kind of added Taiwanese elements to them. And then there's another one too. We were celebrating small businesses. So I drew this kind of menu from Liu Mama Fan Tuan. So it's my favorite, one of my favorite breakfast spots in Taipei. And then I went back in 2023, and then that trip got me back to experimenting with printmaking. So the first piece we have here is a Taiwanese ephemera vending machine. So after that trip, I think of all like the vending machines you see in Asia, especially in Taiwan. And I kind of wanted to create like an imaginary vending machine of all my favorite things from Taiwan. And so I kind of like ephemera are just kind of like little trinkets. But these are kind of items that I see that just make me feel like I'm back in Taiwan. And so I think this piece is really fun. I think a lot of people, when they see it, like to kind of like look at it, see like what items they identify and what items. And then I have a little key on the bottom as well. So I think I'm trying to create work where I think when people see it, if you're Taiwanese, you've traveled to Taiwan, like you know what it is. But maybe if you don't, I still have a little info guide there, so you can kind of get to know what Taiwanese culture is. So these are a bunch of little fun items. And then just to quickly talk through like the risograph process. So this print itself is actually 3 colors. It's yellow, red, and teal. So I run it through a machine 3 times. So it's like 3 stencils on top of each other. So that's kind of why it creates this like colorful effect. And then another piece I did was just with Taiwanese fruits. I used the same 3 colors as from the vending machine, but this is kind of a whole different vibe. So I just wanted to celebrate fruits that I love in Taiwan and make it colorful, make it fun. And then my last piece here is Taiwanese breakfast. So this was something I've been wanting to do for a while. It's probably my favorite meal in the entire world. I kind of created this really retro menu of Taiwanese breakfast items. And this, like I said, is actually one of my Taiwanese princess. This is actually my bestseller. I thought, which actually, everyone says it shouldn't be surprising, but I think it still surprises me because this is just like something I really wanted to do. I didn't think about if this print was going to be successful. This is just something I really love. I thought it was really personal, but people really, really love this print. And I think on the right, you'll see this is a snippet from a West Coast craft market. It was my first West Coast craft market in the Bay Area. It's pretty competitive to get in, but my Taiwanese print, my breakfast print, got featured in the newsletter that they send out a couple of days before. So, and I think people get super excited seeing this print. I think I found other breakfast aficionados that way too. So it's been fun being able to share my work in person and seeing people get excited about it. And then all this work culminated in a solo show at IE. So IE is a retail concept store in San Diego. Carly is the owner. She's half Taiwanese American. She's half Taiwanese. So she lent me her gallery space in the back to have a show. So it was just all my Taiwanese artwork. So I printed out my journal spreads, put them in shadow boxes, showcased all the risograph prints that I shared. So it was kind of cool having a space that had just all Taiwanese artwork celebrating what being Taiwanese American meant to me. And then I guess a point I wanted to drive is just how specificity makes my work stand out. And then I think because of that specificity, I think what I create actually feels more real and actually more universal to others. I'm going to go back and share through the pieces I've shared, but I think with these 2 risographs specifically, I think people who are familiar with Taiwanese culture and food kind of see what it is. But with my little infographic, I think I can also invite people who aren't as familiar to learn as well. I have a tendency to kind of put as many items as I can into each piece. And so I think hopefully that's kind of a way to celebrate like the breadth and the richness of Taiwanese culture. I think these journals as well, I think I've been told multiple times that people just really love the whimsical nature, how colorful it all is. And I think that hopefully that color reflects how rich and how much I love being Taiwanese is. I think, and I actually made those journals into a book. And so I called it Taiwanese Homecoming. I think my time in Taiwan in 2022 really felt like a homecoming into like who I was as a person. And so I made it into a book. And then you can see on the photo here that I modeled the cover of the Taiwan passport. Again, it's one of those things that's kind of like, if you know, you know. I think a lot of Taiwanese and Taiwanese Americans who see this like know that that's the passport. But it's been also great kind of explaining to people who didn't know that what this all kind of means. And then a big point I wanted to talk about was what it's been like selling my really Asian, really Taiwanese artwork at craft markets. I started selling more craft markets starting in like late 2022, and it's been a big shift actually just in terms of my business. It's actually probably the biggest chunk of my income. But I've been doing a lot of markets and pop-ups around the Bay Area, so I need to do more in Los Angeles. And like in the Bay, we have the Taiwanese American Cultural Festival every May, which is really great because it's all Taiwanese American entrepreneurs showcasing their products. And then I would also say Renegade Craft and West Coast Craft are also big craft markets that I'm a part of. I wanted to bring those two up specifically because they're quite competitive. They're actually very competitive to get in. And I think they've also been historically very white. And so I was a little nervous. I got into Renegade. I was really excited for it, but I was a little nervous because I've been at very Asian American craft centered like art markets, but I hadn't been one kind of like Renegade before. There was a story, this guy's words, it still sticks with me, but at my first Renegade, a vendor neighbor of mine, I will say also a white man, saw my work and asked like how my work does with my demographic. I think I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he was being well-intentioned, but I it felt insinuated like, how does your Asian work do with Asian people? But I think that got me a little nervous, but I wanted to share that actually my work has actually done really, really well at these markets. It surprised me at first just how specific my work is, but I think people are super excited to see it. I think I've had fellow vendors wondering why so many people are at my booth, but I think it just proves that there is a hunger and a thirst and an interest in this kind of work. And I have my bullet points down there of my top 10 selling prints this year. 4 of them are Taiwanese. So the breakfast print, the ephemera print, the mahjong flowers, and the rotao, they are all in my top 10 like bestsellers. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more too just about the Taiwanese American community and how we show up for each other. A lot of those relationships mean a lot to me, and it's a fulfilling part of why I do what I do. If I go back to the craft markets, I've met so many customers who get super excited about my work. It really means so much that my work can impact them. So I think seeing customers constantly show up kind of really fuels me to do what I do. And I think also at these markets too, I've met so many other Taiwanese American creatives and entrepreneurs and a lot of people in the food space as well. So I think by putting myself out there, proudly asserting that I am Taiwanese American, I was actually able to attract a lot of other people who feel the same way too. Again, kind of reiterating that we are a really small growing community, but I think we're really, really tight knit. So I think if you reach out, like you'll find your people. I think the last 2 years, like my network has just blossomed with people just excited about my work and excited to work with me and just get to know. So just here's a photo here just from like the past 2 years of other Taiwanese American food people, creatives that I've met, got to hang out with. It's really funny. It's funny that Eric is on this panel because I got to meet him in person last year in Taipei. So it's just kind of proving how amazing and small this community is. And then I think just my outward expression and love for all things Taiwanese has just helped me grow personally and professionally. I think just I would kind of end with this, but just kind of seeing how my art has evolved, how I've evolved. 2017, when I started out, again, I cast a pretty wide net by trying to talk about the broader Asian American experience. But over time, I felt a lot of pressure to be, I don't know, the authority for this, but I know that I'm not. And then being able, by doing more Taiwanese specific work, I think I got to feel like more like me. I felt a lot less pressure, got to play around a lot more, experiment with my work. I think I felt a belonging with the Asian American community when I first started out, but I feel like the warmth and generosity of the Taiwanese American community has been like really overwhelming, but overwhelming in a really good sense. I feel less pressure to prove myself. I think work feels more fun and intuitive. I think, again, back to the community, the people that I've got to meet, like they all kind of feel like family in a sense. And then I think people ask us, what does Taiwanese American mean to me? And I think previous speakers have mentioned it's pretty nebulous topic. It's kind of intangible, but it just kind of feels like home and it feels like me. And that's it. And then, so thank you so much for listening to this.
Yeah, thank you, Felicia, for your presentation. It was great to see your trajectory of how your career has changed. And I think your comment about specificity is really interesting. We actually did a podcast episode recently with Jay Lin, who's a founder of Gaga Ulala, which is an LGBTQ streaming platform based out of Taiwan. And he was saying that when he first started up his streaming platform, a lot of people were kind of like, well, why are you just creating a platform for gay media? Like, you aren't going to be able to make any money. This is, why are you doing this? And I think it just really shows that there are a lot of markets and communities that are really undervalued because we're always trying to promote to the mainstream. And actually these markets are there too. And they also deserve to be, to be shown, to have things that are made for them as well. So I think that's great. We're going to transition into our Q&A section of the panel. So if anybody has any questions, please send them in the chat. I might just use my moderator's prerogative and start with one question to both Isabel and Felicia. But hearing about your experiences, I think one thing that I always felt is very difficult for me as someone that, wants to help promote Taiwan. I also do some art as well. So, I think a lot about how identity factors into art. And I think it's really interesting about this idea of trying to create artwork for a group versus for your own individual self. So how do you deal with the type of pressures of feeling like you need to represent Taiwanese Americans, that you need to have certain Taiwanese American signifiers in your art? Or is it something that you feel like a lot of pressure to cater to audiences? Or is it something that you just base on your own feelings towards the community? And how do you balance those two pressures of the group versus the individual? Is there, Felicia, would you like to start?
I can start with that. I think it's a constant struggle. But I think at the root of it, I think it has to come from me. I think I talked about it in my presentation where I cast too wide of a net. And I even think too, even from like a numbers perspective, like the prints that have done well have been ones that I've just done for myself. So I think if I do it for myself, I think that love for it just really shows in the work. I think people resonate with that. I think they know that I make work that's important to me. So I think people can see that. I still try to do like research and stuff because I think in the back of my mind, I still want to be a great representation of what being Taiwanese American is. So I am cognizant and aware of what other people may want to see. But I think as an artist specifically, I think there's a bit of selfishness with it to kind of rooted in kind of what I want to say. And hopefully if I'm authentic and really true to myself, that it resonates with others. But I think to your point, it's still kind of a constant struggle. I feel like I kind of waffle between both, but I think I know that my true north is if it's important and real to me, That's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, Isabel, how would you approach this? I think also, especially when you're talking about the translations of your books, that also made me think about like, well, how do you choose the right words? How do you make sure that, and if you choose the right words that work for someone else, but not for you, how do you balance that type of?
Absolutely. So for me, the English, when I was writing the English song, right, the lyrics, to retell these nursery rhymes in Chinese, I really wanted to make sure that it's a song that I can say that it's my original song too, like the English portion of it. So for me, even though I would receive feedback from friends, from family, or reader of a first book, whatnot, like they really want to know how they can learn the language through music, right? Learn Chinese, learn Mandarin. And a lot of times they try to like reach out and say, hey, can you publish, can you create a curriculum that's sort of, sorry, that's my phone. Can you create a curriculum to use music to teach my kids Chinese, for example? But for me, I really want to stick to my authentic and also creative side, which is portraying these songs in English to help people who may not have previous connection to Taiwan, but may be curious to learn about Chinese, right, about Mandarin, and also about Taiwanese culture. But also the underlying themes are also important to me. So for example, the fishing song, the themes is about overcoming difficulties. And this may not have been the case in the original song, right? I feel like as a child, when we heard the song 捕鱼歌, it's about, I'm thinking a middle-aged man going out to fish, but I'm retelling the story of the song as a little girl going out to the sea as an adventure and overcoming this seemingly impossible task. And 造飞机, I'm portraying two little girls pursuing their dream to build this imaginary airplane so they can fly up to the sky, which I don't think was necessarily the case in the original song, but I'm sort of taking it with my own perspective and creativity to sort of present to the readers.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're adding your own spin on these things and building upon them. I think a lot of times as Taiwanese Americans, we come into these conversations feeling like we need to be authentically Taiwanese, but then it's like, well, what about being authentically Taiwanese American? How do we bring our own perspectives on the culture that we love so much and are trying to teach to other people? We do have two questions in the chat, one for Isabel, one for Felicia. So I'll just read those out. And I think we might be coming up on time, so we'll see how we're doing after this. First for Isabel, regarding music therapy in your books, have you had any feedback from non-Asian people finding it relevant? And then for Felicia, how much did the geographic area you live in help you transition from a traditional corporate life to an artist life?
I'm happy to share with you all.
Great.
We'll
start with yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm happy to share with you all that like I've actually received really great feedback from non-Asian people, because I started off sort of just hoping to create resources for other therapists and other educators who may not know Chinese but needing to work with like a Taiwanese or Chinese like client. And so I've had so many families reaching out to me. Maybe they're multicultural families. So I have a multicultural family too. My husband is American and my two kids are mixed too, right? And so I heard from other readers who may be in the same case where the non-Taiwanese spouse is able to sing the song that, this Taiwanese song to their child. And so that's been really heartwarming to me. And I've received feedback from other therapists and other educators within their classrooms and their patient settings. So that's really touching for me, and also very happy to be able to sort of, promote our Taiwanese culture to others as well too.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad that you were able to have such good feedback. Oh, sorry. Felicia, take it away.
I guess my question is how where I lived has made an impact on my transition from corporate to artist. I mean, I think it's not lost on me. I mean, I grew up in the Bay Area, and then I spent most of my corporate life in New York. So those are both big coastal cities with large Asian American populations. So I think, I don't know if so much location, it's just like I was lucky I had a corporate job that let me quit had savings, so I was able to transition to become an artist. And I think the biggest shift, so New York was great in terms of there's tons of artists there. Like I think everyone just knows each other. We just all live on top of each other. So I think that was a great place for me to build, find my voice. I met so many other artists in New York. So I think that kind of made me confident with my switch. And then moving back to the Bay, again, I think I'm also very lucky in the Bay that a lot of the big competitive craft markets are also in San Francisco. So I think that's another stroke of luck on my side. So I think I'm taking advantage of that. And the Bay, we also have a lot of Asian Americans, a ton of Taiwanese Americans. So my target demo is here as well. So I'm very grateful. I've been able to live on both coasts, and I have my target demos where I am. So yeah, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, that's great. I think we still have a little bit of time, so I might do what Richard did last time and shoot you off a question that you could both answer in 30 seconds to round us out. But I really want to hear from both of you. What does it mean to be Taiwanese to you, and what are you most proud about in terms of your Taiwanese American identity? Maybe starting with Isabel.
It sounds like a simple question, but I feel
I'm
like
forcing you to condense it.
before that it's complicated, right? So for me, I actually feel like a third culture kid because I immigrated at a younger age. But I'm, growing up, I sort of embraced both identities, like Taiwanese and also American, and not quite the same as people who were born and raised as Taiwanese American in the US their whole life. But when I go back to Taiwan, I'm very obvious I'm a foreigner now. But I think embracing that the third culture kid culture or identity has been really beneficial for me because I can be both Taiwanese and American. And also part of the factor is actually being a mother to two kids. And what does it mean to pass off this Taiwanese American, identity to them, and how they will actually connect with it and also embrace with it. So my husband and I actually have committed to taking our kids back to Taipei, Taiwan every year so they can have this full immersion experience there to learn the language, to really experience the culture locally. And for me, really just be bold about saying that I'm a Taiwanese American musician or Taiwanese American author. And let that conversation prompt, right? Like, oh, what's with Taiwan and China? What's with like all these things that were mentioned earlier today, and just to help educate others about it, because sometimes they just don't know and they're curious, and I think it's okay that people ask those questions.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it is great to be able to actually, just start to just have the word Taiwanese and Taiwan more in the public and have people responding to that. Yeah, Felicia?
That's like a loaded question. I think I still go back to how I ended my presentation, that it just feels kind of like home. I think when I lived in Taiwan in 2022, as an American, embracing my Taiwanese heritage just makes me feel more me. But I think even living in Taiwan, I also feel like that feels like home. It's actually been interesting bringing my partner back into it, because had kind of had opposite experiences. He felt more like a foreigner in Taiwan versus I felt more at home. So I think being able to embrace both facets of my identity, I feel like I can just kind of more seamlessly kind of exist. It doesn't matter where I am. I don't feel like I'm like without or like less than. I just feel more whole. So I don't know if I can put into words what being Taiwanese means to me. I think I again segue a lot more to just community, just having found family wherever I am, feeling really comfortable. And I feel like Taiwanese, the biggest impact when I lived in Taiwan was just how warm and generous everyone is. And then even with the people I've met here, it's just the warmth and generosity of everyone I've been with. So it just feels like I have like a massive family around the world. So it feels great.
Yeah, that's so great. That's that kind of inclusivity and community that you can just tap into. And I think maybe, you say it's hard to put into words, and that's why we express it through art, right? And that's why that's why you have so many art series. So I guess maybe we should just, make sure to buy your book, Homecoming, and then we'll really see what being Taiwanese means to you. All right, we're kind of ending up towards the end of the panel, so maybe I'll just call it here. I think we do have a 10-minute break before the private roundtable, so everybody can have a little bit of extra time to go to the bathroom, do whatever you need before the private roundtable. Thank you so much to Felicia and Isabel, and also to GW for this event. And if I could just add one little plug at the end of this panel, GTI, my organization, is having an event next week on LGBTQ rights and connecting Taiwan and the world through LGBTQ communities. So please check it out. And I'm really excited about the event. I will be moderating it. So please look forward to that as well. And I hope to see everyone for the private roundtable, well, for this roundtable discussion as well. So thank you so much. And let's have a round of applause for our panelists.
Hello, everybody. Just a sound check. And everybody can hear me? All right. Hello, everybody. So welcome to the concluding roundtable of this symposium on Taiwanese American identity through the arts, organized by TERP, that is the Taiwan Education and Research Center at George Washington University, directed by Leona Chen and Alexa Jovan. I'm Jonathan Chiu, a professor of English at GW, and I'm an affiliated faculty in the Seeger Center for Asian Studies and in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. Thanks so much to TERP and the Seeger Center, faculty, staff, community members for organizing, and thanks to all of our speakers and moderators who are here joined together for this roundtable, along with a welcome to you, members of the audience. For those of you who may be just turning in right now, I'm just going to offer in the chat a summary of everybody's bios and who everybody is, since we won't have time to introduce everybody here. You can refer to this link and their work on this website. I'd also like to just acknowledge my co-moderator of this roundtable, Christine Lin. I invite you, Christine, to just introduce yourself as well, and then we can move to our conversation.
Sure. Thank you, TERP, for organizing, and the Seeger Center for organizing this. My name is Christine Lin. I'm a non-resident visiting scholar at George Washington's Seeger Center for Asian Studies, but my day job is a refugee rights advocate, which has pretty much nothing to do with Taiwan, except that I came to the work through my interest in human rights issues in Taiwan and the violations of folks in Taiwan. And I'll just leave it at that. Looking forward to the discussion.
All right. Thank you very much, Christine. It's been a pleasure to work with you. And I should give you a shout out to your really important work on Taiwanese American identity, including a really important survey and a number of articles on this topic, really putting this field in academics as a research field in its own right. I think putting names to things is important. Being able to put a name to Taiwanese American identity as a research topic is just as important as it is in thinking about arts and storytelling. I just wanted to open up with just some a general comment, something that just I've observed and found so energizing here throughout our conversations. I think it's really refreshing, as came up in our opening keynote with Leona, that there's a tendency to think about Taiwanese American identity through two frameworks, right? One is US-China relations, and how is Taiwan caught in the middle? The second is what Asian Americanists might call boba capitalism, right? Boba tea, other superficial signifiers of Taiwanese or Taiwanese American identity, just being something to be consumed for a mainstream audience without any sort of critical thought, right? I think all of our discussions, including the arts, music, film, media, activism, poetry, all of these forms of storytelling seem to be showing us that Taiwan and Taiwanese American identity is much more complex than any of those two frameworks, right? In general, I'm just I have a lot of questions. I'd like us to kind of loop back to one of these questions that has informed the beginning of our conversation. That is, why does identifying as as Taiwanese or Taiwanese American matter? Why does it matter that we're finding ways to bring visibility to that community and that identity? That's a big question, but from your vantage points, how does this conversation clarified how that matters to you and to your work? I'm going to open that up to anybody who feels like they would like to answer that. Yes, Isabel.
If that's all right. So for me, I would say that like prior to music therapy work, when I was in the classical music world, most classical musicians know about Taiwanese actually, because there's a lot of Taiwanese musicians that come out, right? We have very rigorous training, and there's a lot of great Taiwanese artists around the world. But outside of classical music world, a lot of times it's just, I think some of you have mentioned in your presentation, Taiwan, oh, I love Thai food, that kind of response. And it's very tiring to hear that, over and over. But for me personally, I think the pursuit of really sort of like announcing that I am Taiwanese American started when I was working in the Silicon Valley in a startup that had a side office in Beijing, China. And it was a company founded by expats based in Beijing. So they're not necessarily Chinese people, but I was traveling there 3 to 4 times a year and 2 weeks at a time. And so because I'm fluent in Mandarin, right? So the locals were always trying to connect with me, which is a good thing. And, they're curious. They think I'm them, but I think the more I connect with them, the more I realize that I was so different. There's so many fundamental differences, which I'm sure many of you understand, right? So then it got me thinking about how, all right, there are a lot of people who don't necessarily understand Taiwanese or Taiwanese American culture. And I feel like this, I don't know, duty to spread and express and share. For example, like sometimes people ask me, oh, how's that different? You guys all speak the same language, right? I'm like, actually, no. I mean, I grew up with religious freedom. I grew up with, freedom of speech, and that's totally different. And having personally spent so much time in China, I know that is not the case. I've seen, firsthandly. So I think those conversations are interesting, and just thinking about like instead of being like offended when people don't know, just taking that as an opportunity to educate others is important.
Yes, I see you, Adrian.
Yeah, not to bring it back to US China again, but I do think that, I mean, when you look at identities that are under threat and the fact that Taiwan is a place that is, under threat, I think that does, of course, make us a lot more like we see the importance of being able to talk about Taiwan and say, we are here, we exist, and don't forget about us. And personally, I really do think that also just telling people about these differences, that Isabel is talking about, that, we don't have to be, aggressive or confrontational about it, but, there are differences. And I think we need to be able to celebrate that and show people that we are a different, a different country, I think, but, a different region at least, and a different people, and we do have different identities. And, I want the world to be able to see us. So I think that from that angle and thinking about the future of Taiwan, I think it is really important to continue to identify as Taiwanese and say that we are Taiwanese.
I think working with a lot of Taiwanese Americans, myself going through like undergrad, the Taiwanese American associations, then going to Taiwanese American professionals, I think a large portion of it, I used to, growing up in Taiwan, I didn't understand the sense of community and lack of belonging because everyone around me, I was the majority, so to say. But coming to the States and seeing it, I used to look down on like, oh, this Taiwanese American just social community and everything. And I realized that I never realized how important it was for someone just to feel seen, just to feel like there's a sense of belonging. And whether it is a social community or whether it goes as far as the activism, but on a personal level, no matter what kind of identity anyone might take themselves is just nice to be seen, just to be heard and not feel alone. So I think if anything, it's just a mental health thing. It makes people feel just better and hopefully don't feel like they're the odd one out. Yeah.
I think like Eric, I grew up also in the majority, but I grew up in the States. I grew up in Taiwanese America, where it was almost weird to not be Taiwanese American. So for me, I also did not have to struggle with these issues of belonging. So for me, I care about the history. I care about its implications to make us more compassionate and principled people who have a heart for those at the margins because we have systemically been there for so long. And so I think as we celebrate how far the Taiwanese American community and identity have come, it's important to note that we are still trying to figure out who we want to be in this very violent and hostile world, and that asks a lot of us. And I think it starts with humility and seeing that like no one is morally perfect or pure, and it's not China bad, U.S. bad, Taiwan good. It's hard and it's messy, and I think it starts with more specifically having to acknowledge that even the most impassioned talking points for Taiwanese independence often obscure our own complicity as hand settlers or deploy indigenous aesthetics to defend our moral ground, even as we've ceded so little back to them. So I think this dissonance is something that can really compel you to lean in. And it's the responsibility of us as the children who love our elders and our own futures enough to articulate and figure out how to live out these ideals. And to Eric's point, like the social aspect matters, right? Community allows us to believe that if we start from a place of camaraderie and love, that will encourage us to find solutions. Whereas if we start from a place of fear mongering, we'll seek punishment. And so the hope I have for us as Taiwanese Americans is that we are going to build peace for all communities, starting with our own.
A fantastic answer, Leona. And then that notion of multiplicity, we actually did have somebody from the audience who would like to share, and Christine and I would like to invite this person to share if they'd like. Jen?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, my video is not on. I'm unwell today. So thank you for everyone's stories. And I'm actually not part of the panel, but I really think about this, at least for me personally, what it means to be Taiwanese American. My, I guess, trajectory is a little bit different from everyone's. I was born in Taiwan, but came as a toddler. And I didn't actually spend a lot of time in Taiwan like a lot of Taiwanese Americans I know who get to go back a lot and have ties with the community. So, and also I am an artist. I spent my career as an artist manager. So I manage bands and then I manage visual artists. I grew up very punk rock, which actually also meant I didn't have a lot of even Asian American friends because you know the tropes and also some of the things our culture values. So I always felt very much like an outsider in a lot of ways with my community. However, I'm very, very close with my family, and my family has been in Taiwan for centuries. And my grandfather was a prisoner during the White Terror. He is in one of the human rights museums in Taiwan. And I watch a lot of interviews and I watch a lot of documentaries about him. And so the history of the island and the history of the people, the Han settlers, and I'm not in any way dismissing how much it is a settler colony and very much indigenous communities were there before us. But I also think that for the Taiwanese Han settlers, it's a very distinct community outside of what is Chinese. And this is, I'm speaking of culture and history and not strictly politics, though I do have my views on that. And I think about, the fact that there has been forced assimilation over and over again. My grandparents only know how to read and write Japanese because we were a colony. My mother and her siblings were forced assimilated to Mandarin and persecuted because of we were political prisoners. And because it was so difficult for us, I live here and English is my primary language. And so I look at so many generations of my family speaking different languages, understanding different cultures, all of it sort of mashing together so that we can coexist as a family. And I think this sort of unique history is very, very important. You know, and I know not everyone in Taiwan has this, you know, a lot of people came at different points, but for me and my family, it's very important to know that we have a distinct lineage.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that sharing, Jen. And I think a lot of us listening and hearing that, I'm sure could identify with many facets of that story. I think something that I've found emerging from this conversation is that Taiwan is, we can think about Taiwan as an island geopolitically. We can also think of it as an archipelago. And in many ways, the experiences that people may have with Taiwan as a homeland, imagined or felt or physical, are always multiple, right? We're always going to be coming to our idea of Taiwan through many different avenues. And this is something that I gather from many of these artistic and media representations we've explored here, is that Taiwan can never just be one thing. Taiwanese American identity can never be one thing. So being able to take advantage, as Leona said, of the heterogeneity of our stories, I think is an important facet of what we can do. Something that I'm also kind of interested in terms of the panelists here, and also what Jen has just said, is for many, but not all of us, Taiwanese American identity is a side gig. A lot of people have narrated their professional, trajectories as I was trained in X field, professionally or academically. My identity was something I kept on the side. Now maybe it's front and center. I guess what suggestions might you have, panelists, to people who are wanting to take Taiwanese American identity and put it front and center? What are some ways that people can do that? What have you learned about that process, if that's been a trajectory for you?
I guess
Yeah,
I can
Felicity.
speak to that because I mean, that's exactly what I did, actually unintentionally. I mean, if you want to make it into, I got asked this multiple times. I think it's just like, just do it. Like, I think there's a lot of fear in it, but it's just like, just do it. We have so many tools out there for you to share whatever words that you have. I've said it also multiple people that you will find your people. Like, reach out to people who are doing it. I've met the fact that I knew like half the panelists here before kind of proves how small and supportive this community is. I feel like it's just, if your gut's telling you to do something, just do it. I also think there's maybe a bit of a scarcity mindset, like, oh, like Felicia's already done this, like I don't want to do this too. Like, there's room for all of us. We all have different stories and perspectives. And then when it comes to identity, I think just how it's nebulous, it changes over time. So I think to not worry so much that this piece or whatever I create needs to stand the test of time. I don't really relate to a lot of my old work anymore, but it got me to where I am right now. So I think you're going to make mistakes. Your work isn't going to be for everybody, but don't let these things kind of stop you.
I also turned like a side into my real job now, but I do think when I told my friends that I was coming back to Taiwan, a lot of my Taiwanese friends especially said like, "Wow, that's so brave of you." You know, there's a lot of Taiwanese people, they've been trying, like there's an immigration lottery system, they're trying their hardest to become American, and they'd be like, "Eric, you're born an American, why would you want to go to Taiwan? Like, that's so brave of you." And I always reply with the thing saying that I'm not necessarily brave. It's just that I'm fortunate. My family financials we're financially stable, which means I can afford to take this kind of a risk. But I think part of it also comes with, like, similar to Felicia's background, is just like testing it out. I think, you know, it is hard doing Taiwan on the side sort of thing, but doing it at a certain point, you realize that the amount of time you spent into doing it means you really want to do it, and two, you're probably pretty good at it. And so then at certain points you'll feel like, okay, like I'm ready to take the plunge, right? I do think there is sometimes a on a practical point of view, like that that sense of trying things out before fully taking plunge into it would be the safer route, so to say. I think always try to do it. And I remember I went to like a Taiwanese American professionals event like in back in New York. It was like over 10 years ago, and someone said like, hey, your 20s is the best time to do entrepreneurship because you have no responsibilities, you have no family, you have no you have no family to feed, sort of say. And so you try it, you fail, and you go back to find a corporate job. Like if that worst comes to worst. I think, but I do think, I remind myself that I'm fortunate to do that. But better to have tried and failed than to have never tried at all.
If I may add to or echo to both Felicia and Eric, I think for me, being known in the Taiwanese American community actually was a surprise for me because I started off writing books, not necessarily for just Taiwanese Americans. And I was just hoping to, like help increase access to Mandarin and to music, to non-Taiwanese, non-Asian. But actually that identity become more known. I start having followers and readers reaching out, right? Like they really want to connect on that identity as Taiwanese Americans. And I think it's really wonderful. And I think I shouldn't have been surprised because even when I was a student and studying in Paris, I've been sort of being flagged down by other people, other Taiwanese people studying in Paris, like, hey, are you Taiwanese? And for me, having lived in the US for so long, and similar to Jen, who mentioned, like, after immigration for 20 years, I had only gone back to Taiwan twice. And so at the time as a student, I didn't necessarily feel very Taiwanese, but people still like flag me down somehow and connect. And I guess that the point is that Taiwanese community has such a strong, I guess, hold to each other, right? Like we show up to each other, like somebody mentioned. So I think if I was to share any advice to people trying to take a plunge, is that, know your why, have a mission. I always think back on the TED Talk, Starting with Why. I think that's also a book. And that's been really impactful to my work. I think that's how your work will become authentic to others when you know your why.
That's beautifully stated. Christine, did you have a follow-up on this line of thought?
Yeah, so I had a follow-up to Jonathan's question. So we're talking about how, an individual might turn their side gig into a job, but how can the Taiwanese community kind of support these efforts? Like I myself have had these passion projects on the side and kind of see it as this is just a part of what I do, but like what can we as a community do to bring attention to whether it's Taiwanese American arts, scholarship, academia, to get like funded networks and take Taiwanese American studies is kind of how I would frame it seriously. I'd love to hear from the panelists your ideas about the broader community beyond the individual.
If I could just jump in, I guess. So, I mean, as someone who has been able to, I work at Global Taiwan Institute, which is a Taiwan-focused think tank. So I have been able to do work solely focused on Taiwan. I feel very lucky in that. But I do find that there's not a lot of paid opportunities for people that want to do this type of work. Maybe DC is often like this just because we have so many passionate people in DC that will work for not very much money. But, I think a lot of times I just wish that there are more paid positions that actually allow these people to really take it on as their full position, rather than feeling like they have to have another job to support themselves and have living wages through another way, and then just do this on the side. So I do think that I hope that there can be more opportunities for people to be paid to get funding. I think, of course, there's a lot of excellent sources of funding, such as Spotlight, which is helping with the funding of this very program. But I do find that from someone who has, been working in the community in DC, as well as trying to find funding for different projects that I've been doing in DC, sometimes it's not always easy to find funding for Taiwanese Americans specifically. It maybe focuses just on Taiwan, or Taiwan is seen as too controversial, so it's not really something that is covered by funding. I mean, Taiwan is not in the UN, so that already limits some sources of funding. So I really think if there are more funding opportunities, more paid opportunities, then that would really allow the field to grow.
I'm just going to jump in real quick. I know I'm not Taiwanese American, but I do think that if you're dual nationality, dual citizenship, actually the Taiwanese government does have lots of grants, and I think this is one of the things that's really beautiful about Taiwan too, is that they really want to support artists and people that are creating stuff. And the grants can be small and they can be big. The only issue is that the large majority of those are all in Chinese, and you have to get used to how to do the proposals. And that is like a giant thing in itself. But that is another thing that you guys shouldn't look past. Just kind of, always realize that that's also a resource, because Taiwan is really eager to share even Taiwanese American stories with the world. And that's part of the reasons why the Taiwanese government funds so much. They put out so much money towards movies, towards fashion designers and all this stuff, so that they have a spotlight on Taiwanese people around the world. So don't forget about that as well.
Speaking from a company that is funded by the government, like that's very true. There's a joke. It's good and bad, but that one of the biggest clients you can get in Taiwan is the Taiwanese government, because the government has so much to pay for. The bureaucracy and forms is a disaster, but there is a lot there. It's not always a good thing. We can get into that in separate times if anyone's curious. But there are a lot of fundings, and but this is where things also get kind of not the greatest, is that sometimes it requires a Taiwanese bank. It sometimes requires that you already have Taiwanese citizenship. Not everyone does. Not everyone who tells Taiwan stories does. Not everyone who's Taiwanese American might necessarily have a Taiwanese citizenship. I think plugging for another event, I do think there's an event somewhere about how to become a Taiwanese citizen if there's interest. I forgot what that event is. But yeah, there's money out there, but it's hard to access, and I would love to, as just also speaking, even if you know Mandarin and Chinese, it's still a pain in the ass. But as someone in Taiwan, love to help out as well too, and hopefully Taiwan Plus can help fund more of these projects as well too.
I just wanted to add a small thing. I think I wanted to also kind of address this from like a really even a smaller level than like a major grant is. I got my start with just partnering with other artists and small business and community members. Like Good to Eat Dumpling is a restaurant in Emeryville, California. They had a pop-up. I met customers and clients that way too. So a good way that doesn't feel as overwhelming is, and I think it's going to take initiative like on from yourself, is that like, oh, I want to showcase my Taiwanese work. Let's find a Taiwanese small business and just meet people and do a pop-up, do something small. I think something I've been very grateful for is I started small. My customer base is pretty loyal to me because I started small and I built those relationships that way. So I think there's the route with the grants. I probably have to ask people about how I do that. But I think if you start from the small level, I think it makes it a little bit less daunting. And like I've said, and I've said over and over again, like if you have a great idea, like people are willing to hear it, people will give you the space and the time to execute it. The Taiwanese community has been really helpful for me in that sense. And I was going to say, even like talking to Leona and Ho-Chi from TaiwaneseAmerican.org, like that was like a small platform for me to get my work out there too. So it could be in person, it could be digital. There's people out there willing to support you. I think just kind of have to do the ask.
Yeah, I just want to echo on that. I was also thinking about partnerships like that and collaborations. You can reach out to like people who do podcasts or YouTube channels. And yeah, Leona Chen's TaiwaneseAmerican.org is a great platform. I also think about like how I collaborated with my artist for the books. She's Taiwanese. She's based in Taiwan, and so that collaboration, we have our two different audiences that we're able to reach when we share on our channels. And when I had the opportunity to visit Taiwan, I've been invited, to do like a joint author event with another author. So that's another way to kind of partner up and reach wider audience together. And in the past, I have one friend who's based in California and she traveled to Texas. So we did a little joint event together. But then just by chance, we were in Taiwan at the same time. And so we did another event together, but these are very different demographics, right? Because one is very much like Texas, maybe local Asian Americans, but then in Taiwan, we were talking mostly in Mandarin to the local family. So we definitely tailor our events a little bit differently, but I think partnering with other people, collaborating has led to meaningful relationships, at least in my work, and I would encourage people to consider that.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I believe on this line of, on this thread, Tim has a question.
Yeah, hi. I've been involved in our community ever since I was born in the 70s. And so I was able to witness a lot through my family's activism in the Taiwanese community. And also being involved since I was young in the 90s, I had seen the Korean wave take place and make this huge impact on the perception of South Korea, the perception of Asian Pacific Americans. And even in the 90s, we were hoping like to do something like that with a group of us activist friends. And I'm just throwing it out there, like how possible for us to create a Taiwanese wave with like, you know, and especially rooted in Taiwan. People say there's money there. Can we, is those of you in Taiwan, those of you who know people, can we, or can that, is that a feasibility? That's my question.
I got.
sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead,
Oh,
Eric.
sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. I was asked something similar this past week actually, and I think it's something to. Oh, it was from a Taiwanese American professionals talk. And I think something to remember. I think people always want to replicate the K-pop scene and the K-pop wave, K-dramas, and everything, but I have to double check this. But someone was mentioning that that whole wave was almost like a government push, and it was a collaboration of all the major the chaebongs within Korea to really push that out there. And someone asked if that was a possibility within Taiwan, and to my knowledge anyways, because Taiwan has gone through such a strong authoritarian period, the government is not trying to dictate how things are done. And so there are I'm definitely pro-democracy, but there are, when it's democracy, things go a little bit slower, and it has to be really grassroots. And I think in that terms, it's really hard to have that level of a wave. If it happens, it will be organic. You're talking about maybe not waves, but we've had ripples throughout. We've had talk about all the Mando pop that's flown, that's over. Like not every, like the fact that Tonghua is the Asian American anthem. It's not like the Chinese American or Taiwanese American anthem. It is a Asian American anthem, says something, right? And you have, so I think there are tide ripples that go through, whether it's things like boba and stuff like that. So yeah, I think we can try to replicate it, but I think without like a government push like that, it's extremely hard. But that's from my point of view.
I mean, it's like 5% of their defense budget is actually in Haluya. So that, I mean, it's not a matter, it's just the money. If the money got organized, is because all these small grants just seem really destined to be ripples. But anyways.
At least people that I've talked to too, like Jerry Liu from Taiwan, it seems like from the creators, I don't know, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but from creators that I've heard that are in Taiwan, they're also not really interested in becoming too commercialized and kind of joining together to have such a huge type of commercial impact. So they like keeping it small. So I think, at least from what I understand, it also seems to be a little bit of like a ecosystem, culture, infrastructure type of issue as well. So even if you put the money into it, if the culture is more not as centralized, then I think I'm not really sure if that would have as big of an effect.
I bring it up because, Formosa Studios is trying to push Weekend in Taipei right now. Big, when they tried to push that movie out, it was such a terribly painful grassroots process to distribute things like that. Even if, I mean, it's like random organizations start up and they show random movies all over in random theaters. We don't have like a centralized distribution channel for even Taiwanese films to get distributed out right now. Even the documentaries Taiwan Plus does, it's just, if it gets hits, you know, and someone shares it, you know, it's like if there was this, I mean, maybe Taiwan Plus could be a distribution channel. I mean, this is just things that it's just, it's like we were trying to do an Invisible Nation showing, like random, like 4 or 5 people do it in different cities, you know, and it's just not cohesive. Like maybe back in the 80s and 90s when we had a strong grassroots presence in almost every major city, it was more doable. But now everyone looks to the government, and that's what I was hoping for.
I kind of have a slightly different take on some of this, and I do think that the government has the best intentions with giving all the grants, but then the grants also get abused. So a lot of the money, like, I'm gonna try and speak as carefully as possible, but there's still a lot of people in entertainment that are trying to just make a buck. And the majority of the people at the top that can get the grants, they'll take 80% of the money from the grant, and then the rest gets trickled down finally to the people that are making the art. And it happens throughout almost everything in Taiwan. It ends up like that. I know I'm kind of generalizing, but it happens a lot that there's a couple people that are really good at getting the grants and then finding people to execute what they got the grant for. I do think that there's plenty of talent in Taiwan, but not always the money and the energy is focused in the proper places, unfortunately.
I can concur, but cannot speak in specifics.
Yeah. But I mean, everybody in the movie industry, like I work, you know, and in music, I work really close with a lot of the people that are under KK Box has a lot of music labels as well. And I've worked with all those labels, and they all want to go mainstream. You know, it's not that they want to stay indie. And a lot of those people are one issue that they have too. They have these great international sounds, but a lot of those artists are honestly like ABCs, whether they're from, you know, Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, but then they also have a hard time hitting it with the local audience. And they almost have to hit it with a local audience before they can actually get the momentum to go overseas too. So then there's also this weird gap where it's like, how can you make something that, like, where Taiwan, the majority of people just want to hear ballads, where the rest of the world doesn't want to hear ballads, you know? There's this weird spot. And then the movie industry, there's tons of talent, but then organizing the talent together with the funding, it's really difficult. That also has good stories, because a lot of times stories are just made to get something out there, and they throw big name actors together with a really horrible script a lot of the time, where it's just they're trying to get people in the door, but they're not thinking about the art. But everybody making the film wants to make a good film.
It's so interesting to kind of hear where these conversations are headed as somebody who's, again, in the academic sphere and not in the creative one. But something that kind of aligns what I'm hearing creatives talking about in terms of the industry or markets, and as well as what academics are talking about in terms of public humanities, is this question of audience. Are we aiming for an audience that's wide and broad? Are we aiming for the largest, widest possible audience, or do we reframe things and say, you know, we're looking for depth? You know, we want a deep relationship with an audience. Maybe it's not going to be everyone in the whole world, right? So I guess this is also going back to some of the questions that I think Christine was asking about audience earlier in some of her conversations. I don't know if Christine, you had some of those questions that you wanted to pose to us, or.
Sure. So, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about why identifying as Taiwanese American matters, and appreciated folks' thoughts on that. But But throughout the conversations today, I think folks were also saying that Taiwanese American identity has evolved over the years, and it's also not a monolith. I think Haley mentioned in Taiwan, Taiwanese people aren't a monolith. One representation of Taiwan might not be representative of everyone's. Why are you going to choose this story to tell? So in thinking about that, how do we balance telling some of the shared experiences of the Taiwanese American community, like the Thailand, misinformation with not over generalizing and representing that Taiwanese American identity exists as one and is the same for everybody.
I think while protecting your personal boundaries, find some way to engage with people who think differently than you. I shared an example earlier of being very self-isolated from Taiwanese Americans, from Western families, and the myopia that I experienced as a result. And I only was able to correct this through really challenging conversations with other people. And I get that it can suck and be hard. Like, I love preaching to the choir. I love being affirmed, but I also care enough about how I show up as a Taiwanese American to change and complicate the narrative so that nobody gets left out or left behind. Another example of a very topical, difficult conversation I've had lately is around like domestic politics, where everyone wants to know, like, how do I secure the Taiwanese American vote? And I understand the question. I also think it's a silly question because, to your point, we're not a monolith. And we can problematize that in two ways. I think one, as an individual, being thoughtful enough about how that intersection of like gender or socioeconomic background and where you live in the US affects how you as a person recognize and articulate that identity. And then two, as like institutions and programs, being curious enough to change your talking points and your approach to truly resonate with us as people and not as a category.
That was great too. I have one other thing to add on to this too, because we talked about like, who are we making this for? And I want to return back when I mentioned when I first was speaking, is that like some of the most successful Taiwanese filmmakers, Li Ang, Tai Ming Liang, Hou Xiaoxian, Eddie Yang, they all told stories that meant something to themselves, that were dissecting their own stories. I don't think any of them are trying to, I think Li Ang kind of explored other identity things, but it was still exploring himself still. But they're all kind of making what they want to make, and a lot of that new wave cinema that was the high point for Taiwanese cinema. Unfortunately, we had like this big blow up where everything was like, everybody was looking at it. We're getting into the Cannes, all this stuff, and everybody's looking at Taiwanese cinema, and then it just kind of dropped off. And people stopped making stuff that mattered to them. And now we're kind of stagnant in that regard. But I do think how we've all talked about, like, it's important to make stuff that matters to you and your identity. Because that's what's authentic. That's what people want to see. They can feel it.
Yes, I'm very much reminded of Felicia's story as well on this level, in terms of if you are, authentic to yourself, people will see that and that will have an appeal. And I think it also gets over that, problem, that burden of representation, this idea that your singular story has to, by definition, stand in for everything, right? Which would be impossible, right? So I think there are ways of kind of reframing what the ethics of storytelling around that. I guess this is bringing me to this question of the arts, because we really, when we were planning this, we really wanted to this be about the arts and the media, and specifically, so this is kind of an academic question, but I'm really interested in, like, well, why do the arts matter? Like, what's the difference between just like writing up a policy brief that spells this all out, versus doing a drawing or writing a poem or creating music? Like, why do the arts actually matter? as art for you?
I had a really interesting conversation with my team. My team started saying, because I'm in the news department, and they usually say they want to make more longer length documentaries. They would say it, and then they showed a couple examples, and I realized that my definition of documentary and their definition of documentary was very different. Their sense of documentary was a 15-minute long feature where you have person A, expert B, and voice C talking about this thing from a whole multi-sided point of view. And I think that's important. But I also see that as a news piece. It is as close to a policy paper as you could get. But I think that's where the documentary part really comes in. And when I talk to my colleagues, I say the documentary it pulls a heartstring. It's meant to be emotional. It is meant to resonate in a way that you maybe not be able, you can't say what it is. And I think having an emotional reaction to certain pieces, whether it is emotional reaction to music, whether it is emotional reaction to a piece of art, I think that's where that worth so much more than just these are the facts. I think if we've learned anything over the past years, especially within America, is that facts don't change people. Like you can't argue facts. You can argue facts all day you want, but like you're not going to hit anything. But it is the emotional resonance that really connects people and can even possibly change their minds. I'm not saying that you should always go out with starting to try and change someone's minds, but they can connect with you. People ask like, why does Taiwan Plus exist and things like that, and I say it's just to put it on people's minds. When people like think about it, they're like, oh, Taiwan, like there is something. And so when, for lack of a better word, when shit goes down, they'll be like, oh, I have an emotional resonance. They're not going to be like, oh yes, Taiwan in 1945, after World War II did this. Like they're not going to remember that. Like that's not what you're going for. It's about creating that emotional resonance. And sometimes it's from a person that doesn't do the art part as much. I'm definitely more on like the marketing and distributing part. It's kind of cheating, and I feel kind of bad sometimes because I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do this just to like make them feel something. And I don't know, I think being too cognizant of it is what makes me not really an artist. But I think emotional resonance is really where the art comes in my point of view.
Wow, that's a great answer. I do notice if other people don't have an answer right away, I noticed that Jen has an answer from the audience.
Hi, actually, a lot of what I was going to say was just said, but I think that it is true. It's not, our modern society is so cerebral and everything is so of the intellect. And it's a very, very different feeling than embodying something, especially emotionally. It reminds us of our humanity. I read this, it was this forward in a photography book once, but the author said like,